In the sleepy seaside village of St. Mary's Bay, whispers of smugglers and flickering lights haunt the cliffs. When priceless treasures vanish from Seaside Manor, Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and quiet knitting, uncovers a web of secrets, cryptic notes, hidden caves, and shadowy figures meeting at midnight. As thefts pile up and a new mystery brews at the old lighthouse, only Miss Marple can unravel the truth before the shadows strike again. Will she catch the culprits in time? Chapter 1. Arrival at Seaside Manor. Miss Jane Marple stepped off the rattling train, her small suitcase clutched in one gloved hand. The salty air of St. Mary's Bay hit her like a wave, sharp and fresh, carrying the tang of seaweed and fish. She adjusted her hat, a neat little thing with a single feather, and squinted at the bustling platform. The seaside village stretched before her, all colorful cottages and winding lanes, nestled against cliffs that loomed like silent giants. It was a pretty place, but Miss Marple knew better than to trust pretty places. They often hid secrets, dark ones, tucked behind smiling faces and cheerful waves. She had come to St. Mary's Bay at the invitation of her old friend, Mrs. Beatrice Langley, who owned Seaside Manor, a grand old house perched on the edge of the village. Beatrice's letter had been short but urgent, hinting at trouble, something about strange happenings and uneasy feelings. Miss Marple didn't need much convincing. A puzzle was a puzzle, and she had a knack for solving them, like piecing together a quilt from scraps nobody else thought fit. The station was alive with noise, porters shouting, gulls screeching, and the clatter of a horse-drawn cart nearby. A young man in a faded cap tipped his hat to her. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Langley sent me. I'm Tom, the driver. Got your bags?" "Just this one," she said, handing over her suitcase with a polite smile. Tom, broad-shouldered and red-cheeked, tossed it into the cart like it weighed nothing. Miss Marple climbed up, her movements careful but spry for a woman of her years. The cart jolted forward, wheels crunching over gravel, and they set off towards Seaside Manor. The road wound through the village, past shops with bright awnings and fishermen mending nets in the sun. Miss Marple's sharp eyes took it all in, the way a woman in a blue shawl glanced nervously over her shoulder, the way two men outside the pub stopped talking as the cart passed. Small things, but they stuck in her mind like burrs. People were always telling stories with their actions even when they didn't mean to. "Busy place, St. Mary's Bay," she said, her voice light. Tom nodded, reins loose in his hands. "Aye, miss. Lots of folk come for the sea air, but it's been odd lately. Talk of strange lights on the cliffs, noises at night. Some say it's ghosts." He chuckled, but it was forced, like he didn't quite believe his own joke. "Ghosts?" Miss Marple raised an eyebrow, her tone curious but not mocking. "What sort do they say?" "Oh, you know, the usual. Old sailors lost at sea, wandering spirits. Fishermen love a good tale." He shrugged, but his eyes flicked to the cliffs, where the waves crashed hard against jagged rocks. Miss Marple smiled faintly. She didn't believe in ghosts, but she believed in people, and people, when scared or guilty, could make up all sorts of stories to explain what they didn't want to face. She filed Tom's words away, a thread to tug later. The cart climbed a steep hill, and Seaside Manor came into view. It was a sprawling house, all gray stone and tall windows, with ivy crawling up its walls like green fingers. The garden was wild but lovely, bursting with roses and lavender that swayed in the breeze. A wide porch wrapped around the front, where a woman in a yellow dress stood waiting, her hands clasped tightly. "Jane!" Mrs. Beatrice Langley hurried down the steps as the cart stopped. She was a plump woman with graying curls and a face that looked kind but tired, like someone carrying a heavy load. "Oh, I'm so glad you're here." Miss Marple stepped down, accepting Beatrice's warm hug. "It's good to see you, Beatrice. You look well, though perhaps a bit worried." Beatrice's smile faltered. "You always see right through me. Come inside. Let's have tea. There's a lot to talk about." The manor's hall was grand but cozy, with polished wood floors and a fireplace that crackled softly. A maid, young and nervous-looking, took Miss Marple's coat and hat. Beatrice led her to a sitting room where a tea tray waited, steaming gently. The room smelled of lemon polish and old books, with shelves lining one wall and a window overlooking the sea. They sat, and Beatrice poured tea, her hands shaking just a little. Miss Marple sipped, letting the warmth settle her, and waited. She knew better than to push. People always talked when they were ready, and Beatrice was ready. "It's this place, Jane," Beatrice began, her voice low. "Something's wrong. It started a few weeks ago, odd noises at night, things going missing. A necklace, a silver candlestick, even a guest's watch. And then there's the people. Everyone's acting strange, like they're hiding something." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Who's everyone, dear?" Beatrice ticked off names on her fingers. "There's Mr. Harrow, a retired banker staying here for the summer. He's grumpy but harmless, I think. Then Miss Clara Tate, a young artist, who paints the cliffs. She's quiet, keeps to herself. Captain Reed, an old sailor, lives in the village but comes by often. And, well, my nephew, Lionel. He's been staying here, helping with the accounts. But he's been so moody lately." Miss Marple nodded, her mind already sorting the names like cards. "And the staff?" "Oh, just the usual. Mary, the maid you saw, and cook, who's been with us forever. Tom, of course, and a gardener, old Ben. They're all good people, but—" Beatrice trailed off, her eyes darting to the window. "But?" Miss Marple prompted gently. Beatrice leaned closer, her voice a whisper. "I think someone's watching the house. Last night I saw a light on the cliffs, moving, like a signal. And this morning, there were footprints in the garden, right under my window." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, but her face stayed calm. "Footprints, you say? Interesting. Have you told anyone else?" "Not yet. I didn't want to scare the guests. But Jane, I'm frightened. This isn't just theft or village gossip. It feels dangerous." Miss Marple reached over, patting Beatrice's hand. "Don't worry, dear, I'll keep my eyes open. People are like books, you know. You just need to read them carefully to find the truth." Beatrice managed a weak smile. "You always make things sound so simple." They finished their tea, and Beatrice showed Miss Marple to her room, a small but charming space with a view of the sea. The bed was soft, the quilt handmade, and a vase of fresh flowers sat on the dresser. Miss Marple unpacked her suitcase, hanging her dresses with care, but her mind was elsewhere. Lights on the cliffs, missing items, nervous villagers. It was a puzzle, all right, and she was already itching to solve it. As the afternoon faded into evening, Miss Marple took a walk through the manor's garden. The roses were in full bloom, their scent heavy in the air, but she wasn't here for flowers. She wanted to see those footprints Beatrice had mentioned. She found them near the east wing, under a window with heavy curtains. The prints were deep, made by boots, and they led toward the cliffs before disappearing into the grass. Miss Marple knelt, careful not to disturb the marks, and studied them. They were fresh, no more than a day old, and the size suggested a man, though she couldn't be sure. She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt, and glanced at the cliffs. The sea was calm now, but the rocks looked sharp, unwelcoming. Back inside, she joined Beatrice for a light lunch in the dining room. The table was set simply, with bread, cheese, and a bowl of fruit. Beatrice chattered about the village, the weather, anything but the trouble. Miss Marple listened, nodding, but her eyes wandered to the windows, the doors, the shadows in the corners. She noticed Mary, the maid, hovering nearby, polishing a silver tray that already gleamed. The girl's hands moved too fast, her eyes darting to Beatrice and back to her work. "Mary seems a bit nervous," Miss Marple said softly, spreading butter on her bread. Beatrice sighed. "She's been like that lately. I think the talk of ghosts has gotten to her. She's young, you know, and the village is full of stories." Miss Marple nodded, but she wasn't thinking about ghosts. She was thinking about Mary's quick glances, the way her fingers tightened on the tray. Nervousness could mean many things: fear, guilt, or something else entirely. After lunch, Miss Marple decided to explore the manor. It was a big house, with creaky stairs and long hallways lined with portraits. The paintings showed stern-faced men and women, their eyes following her as she passed. She found the library, a dusty room filled with leather-bound books and a heavy oak desk. Mr. Harrow, was there flipping through a newspaper, his face redder than it had been at tea. "Good afternoon, Mr. Harrow," Miss Marple said, her voice warm. He grunted, barely looking up. "Afternoon. You're the new guest, eh? Beatrice's friend?" "That's right. I'm Jane Marple. Just visiting for a bit of sea air," he snorted. "Sea air's overrated. Nothing but damp and gulls, and all this talk of nonsense, lights, noises, village gossip, that's all." Miss Marple smiled. "You don't believe in the stories, then?" "Not a bit. People see what they want to see. Waste of time." He snapped his newspaper shut and stood, stalking out of the room. Miss Marple watched him go, noting the way his shoulders hunched, the way his hands clenched. Angry, perhaps, or hiding something. She filed that away, too. Next, she wandered to the conservatory, a glass-walled room filled with potted plants and wicker chairs. Miss Clara Tate was there, sketching on a pad, her pencil moving in quick, sharp strokes. She looked up as Miss Marple entered, her face pale and guarded. "Oh, hello," Clara said, closing her sketchbook quickly. "I didn't hear you come in." Miss Marple smiled, settling into a chair. "I didn't mean to startle you, dear. I'm Jane Marple, a friend of Beatrice's. You're an artist, I hear?" Clara nodded, her fingers tightening on the sketchbook. "I paint the cliffs. The light here is special." "It's a lovely place," Miss Marple said, her eyes on Clara's hands. "Though I hear it's been a bit unsettled lately. Strange lights, missing things." Clara's pencil slipped, rolling across the table. "Oh, yes. I've heard the talk, just rumors, probably." She stood, gathering her things. "I should get back to work. Excuse me." Miss Marple watched her go, her mind turning. Clara was nervous, too, and that sketchbook? She'd closed it, like it held a secret. Another thread to tug. By evening, dinner was served in the Manor's dining room, a long table set with silver and candles. Miss Marple sat beside Beatrice, watching the guests as they arrived. Mr. Harrow was a stout man with a red face and a loud voice, grumbling about the soup being too cold. Miss Clara Tate slipped in quietly, her dark hair pinned up, her eyes darting around like a startled deer. Captain Reed, weathered and wiry, told stories of storms at sea, his laugh booming. Lionel, Beatrice's nephew, was a handsome young man with a sulky expression, picking at his food. Miss Marple ate slowly, listening more than talking. She noticed how Mr. Harrow's hands shook when he reached for his wine, how Clara avoided, looking at Lionel, how Captain Reed's stories always circled back to the cliffs. Small things, but they added up like stitches in a pattern. After dinner, the guests scattered, Mr. Harrow to the library, Clara to her room, Captain Reed to the porch with a pipe. Lionel muttered something about a walk, and ATA slipped out. Miss Marple stayed with Beatrice, helping clear the tea things, though her eyes followed Lionel's shadow through the window. "Does Lionel often go out at night?" she asked casually. Beatrice sighed. "More than I'd like. He says he's meeting friends in the village, but I don't know. He's changed since he came here." "Secretive." Miss Marple nodded, filing that away too. Secrets were like weeds. They grew fast and choked the truth if you didn't pull them out. Later, in her room, Miss Marple sat by the window knitting. The sea was dark, the waves a low roar. She thought about the footprints, the lights, the missing necklace. She thought about the people, grumpy Mr. Harrow, quiet Clara, loud Captain Reed, moody Lionel. And she thought about St. Mary's Bay with its pretty cottages and nervous glances. A flicker caught her eye, a light, faint but steady, moving along the cliffs. She set her knitting down, her heart quickening. It wasn't a ghost. She was sure of that. But it was something. Someone. She pulled her shawl tighter and smiled to herself. The puzzle was starting to take shape, and Miss Jane Marple was just the woman to put it together. The evening deepened, and Miss Marple decided to take a closer look at the Manor's grounds. She slipped on her sturdy shoes and a warm cardigan, for the sea air had turned chilly. The moon was a thin crescent, casting just enough light to see by, but not enough to feel safe. She moved quietly, her steps soft on the gravel path, avoiding the main drive where Tom might still be tending the horses. The garden was a maze of shadows, the roses now dark shapes swaying in the breeze. She followed the path to the east wing, where the footprints had been. They were still there, undisturbed, and she traced their path with her eyes, noting how they veered toward a narrow trail leading to the cliffs. She didn't follow. Not yet. The cliffs were treacherous at night, and Miss Marple was no fool. But she stood for a moment, listening to the waves and the distant cry of a gull. Back inside, she found the manor quiet, save for the faint clink of dishes from the kitchen. She made her way to the library where a single lamp burned. Mr. Harrow was gone, but his newspaper lay open on the desk, folded to an article about a recent shipwreck off the coast. Miss Marple skimmed it, her lips pursing. The wreck was old news, but the mention of missing cargo valuables, perhaps, caught her attention. She tucked that thought away, next to Tom's ghost stories and Clara's sketchbook. The next morning, Miss Marple rose early, before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. She dressed in a simple gray frock and joined Beatrice for breakfast in a small parlor overlooking the garden. The table was set with toast, marmalade, and a pot of strong tea. Beatrice looked no better than she had the day before, her eyes shadowed with worry. "Did you sleep well, Jane?" she asked, pouring tea. "Well enough," Miss Marple replied, spreading marmalade on her toast, "though I couldn't help noticing that light on the cliffs last night. Quite curious, don't you think?" Beatrice's cup rattled in its saucer. "You saw it too?" "Oh, Jane, I don't know what to make of it. I've half a mind to call the constable, but what would I say? There's a light on the cliffs? They'd think I'm mad." Miss Marple patted her hand. "No need for that just yet. Let's keep our eyes open and see what we see. Often, the truth comes out on its own, if you give it time." Beatrice nodded, but her face was still pale. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind turning over the pieces of the puzzle. The footprints, the light, the missing items, the nervous maid, the grumpy banker, the secretive artist, the storytelling sailor, the moody nephew. Each was a thread, and she was already weaving them together, though the pattern wasn't clear. Yet after breakfast, Miss Marple decided to visit the village. She borrowed a parasol from Beatrice and set off down the hill, her steps brisk despite the uneven path. St. Mary's Bay was waking up, with fishermen hauling nets and shopkeepers opening their doors. She stopped at the post office, a tiny building, with a bell that jingled as she entered. The postmistress, a stout woman with a sharp nose, greeted her with a nod. "Good morning," Miss Marple said, her smile warm. "I'm staying at Seaside Manor. Just thought I'd see if there's any mail for me." The postmistress, Mrs. Gibbs, checked her ledger. "Nothing yet, miss. You're Mrs. Langley's friend, aren't you? Heard you're here for a rest." "Oh, a rest, yes," Miss Marple said, her tone light. "Though I hear the village has been lively lately, strange lights, I'm told." Mrs. Gibbs's eyes narrowed. "Aye, there's talk. Fishermen say it's smugglers back after years away. Others say it's ghosts. Me, I don't hold with either. But something's afoot, mark my words." Miss Marple nodded, her face thoughtful. "Smugglers, you say? That's interesting. Any particular talk about who they might be?" Mrs. Gibbs leaned closer, her voice dropping. "No names, mind you. But there's a lad in the village, young Jimmy Pike, always sneaking about at night. And that Captain Reed always yammering about the sea. Knows more than he lets on, if you ask me." Miss Marple thanked her and left, her mind buzzing. Smugglers were a new piece and an intriguing one. She made a mental note to keep an eye on Jimmy Pike and to listen more closely to Captain Reed's stories. Back at the manor, the day passed quietly, but Miss Marple was never idle. She chatted with Mary, the maid who blushed and stammered when asked about the village. She watched Lionel, who spent the afternoon in the study, poring over ledgers with a frown. She noticed Clara sketching in the garden, always alone, always glancing over her shoulder. And she listened to Captain Reed, who joined them for tea, and spun a tale about a ship lost in a storm, his eyes gleaming with something that wasn't just storytelling. By evening, the manor felt heavier, as if the secrets were pressing against the walls. Dinner was much the same as the night before, with Mr. Harrow grumbling, Clara silent, Captain Reed loud, and Lionel absent, claiming a headache. Miss Marple ate her fish and potatoes, her eyes moving from face to face, catching every glance, every pause. After dinner, she returned to her room, but sleep was far from her mind. She sat by the window again, her knitting in her lap, watching the cliffs. The light appeared again, fainter this time, but unmistakable. It moved slowly, then stopped, as if waiting. Miss Marple's fingers paused on her needles. She didn't believe in ghosts, but she believed in signals. And signals meant someone was talking to someone else in a language she intended to learn. The night stretched on, and Miss Marple stayed awake, her mind turning over the day's observations. The footprints were real, the light was real, the missing items were real. The people, Mr. Harrow, Clara, Captain Reed, Lionel, Mary, even Tom and Mrs. Gibbs, were all pieces of the puzzle. She thought of her village, St. Mary Mead, where people were much the same, hiding their secrets behind cups of tea and polite smiles. Here in St. Mary's Bay, the secrets were bigger perhaps, but not so different. She thought of Beatrice, so worried, so trusting. She thought of the manor, grand, but worn like a lady past her prime. And she thought of the cliffs, silent but watching, holding answers she would find. Miss Marple set her knitting aside and stood, her eyes on the dark sea. The puzzle was growing, and she was ready for it. Tomorrow, she would tug a few more threads, talk to Captain Reed, watch Clara sketching, ask Tom about the village. She would walk the cliffs if she could and look for more signs of those footprints. And she would listen, always listen, because people always told more than they meant to. She smiled to herself, a small, determined smile. St. Mary's Bay might think it could keep its secrets, but it didn't know Jane Marple. And Jane Marple was just getting started. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Village. Miss Jane Marple woke to the sound of gulls crying outside her window at Seaside Manor. The morning light was soft, painting the room in pale gold, and the sea air slipped through the cracked window, cool and sharp. She lay still for a moment, her mind already turning over the puzzle of St. Mary's Bay. The footprints under Beatrice's window, the flickering light on the cliffs, the nervous glances of the manor's guests. Today, she decided, she would visit the village. People talked more freely on their own ground, and Miss Marple knew how to listen. She dressed in a simple blue frock, pinned her hat with care, and tucked her knitting into a small bag. Breakfast was a quiet affair in the manor's parlor, with Beatrice pouring tea and nibbling toast, her eyes still shadowed with worry. The other guests, Mr. Harrow, Clara Tate, and Captain Reed, were absent, and Lionel, Beatrice's nephew, had yet to appear. Miss Marple noted this, her fingers pausing on her teacup. Absences could say as much as presence. "Beatrice, dear," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle, "I thought I'd take a walk to the village today. Get a feel for the place. Would you like to come?" Beatrice shook her head, her curls bouncing. "Oh, Jane, I'd love to, but there's so much to do here. The accounts are a mess and Lionel's no help. You go, though. The village is lovely, but be careful. People are on edge." Miss Marple smiled, patting her friend's hand. "I'm always careful, dear. I'll be back for tea." The path to St. Mary's Bay was steep but pleasant, lined with wildflowers and the occasional scampering rabbit. The village came into view below, a cluster of whitewashed cottages with red roofs, huddled against the cliffs like sheep in a storm. The sea sparkled beyond, its waves a steady rhythm. Miss Marple's sharp eyes took in every detail. The fisherman, hauling a net, the woman sweeping her doorstep, the children chasing each other near the harbor. Small things, but they told stories. Her first stop was the bakery, a tiny shop with a sign that read, "Pike's Pastries." The bell jingled as she entered, and the smell of fresh bread wrapped around her like a warm blanket. A woman behind the counter, plump and flour-dusted, Gahi looked up with a smile. "Morning, miss. New in town?" "I'm Jane Marple, staying at Seaside Manor," she replied, her tone warm. "Just here for a bit of sea air, and perhaps a scone?" The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Pike, bustled about, fetching a scone and a cup of tea. Seaside Manor, eh? Fine place, that. Though there's been talk lately, odd goings-on up there. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her face curious but calm. Oh? What sort of talk? Mrs. Pike leaned closer, her voice dropping. Things going missing, they say. A necklace, a candlestick, and lights on the cliffs at night. My Jimmy, he's my son, says it's smugglers, like in the old days. But I reckon it's just village nonsense. Smugglers? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. That's quite a story. Does your Jimmy see much of these lights? Mrs. Pike hesitated, wiping her hands on her apron. He's out late sometimes, fishing with his mates. Says he's seen lights moving like signals. But boys his age, they love a tale. Probably just a lantern swinging on a boat. Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away Jimmy Pike's name next to the cliff lights. Sounds like a lively village. Anyone else talking about these smugglers? Mrs. Pike shrugged, but her eyes darted to the window. Oh, folks chatter. Old Ben, the gardener up at the manor, he's always muttering about the cliffs. Says, they're cursed. And Captain Reed, he's got stories for days. Knows every cove and cave round here. Thank you, Mrs. Pike, Miss Marple said, finishing her scone. This was lovely. I'll be sure to come back. She left the bakery, her steps slow but purposeful. The village was waking up now, with fishermen shouting by the docks and shopkeepers setting out their wares. Miss Marple wandered toward the harbor where the air was thick with the smell of fish and salt. A group of men stood near a boat, their voices low but heated. She paused, pretending to admire a display of seashells in a shop window, her ears tuned to their words. It's not right, one man said, his voice rough. Lights again last night. Someone's up to no good. Smugglers, I bet, another replied, spitting into the sand. Like when we were lads, my pa said they used the caves. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Caves, smugglers, lights. The village was buzzing with the same threads she'd found at the manor. She moved on, stopping at the post office next. The bell jingled as she entered, and Mrs. Gibbs, the postmistress, looked up from her ledger. Her sharp nose twitched like she could smell gossip. Miss Marple, from the manor, she said, nodding. Got any mail? Not expecting any, Miss Marple replied, her smile warm. Just thought I'd say hello. It's a charming village, though I hear there's been some excitement. Lights on the cliffs? Mrs. Gibbs's eyes narrowed, but she leaned forward eagerly. Oh, aye. Folks can't stop talking about it. Some say ghosts, some say smugglers. Me, I think it's trouble. Young Jimmy Pike's been seen sneaking about at night, and that Captain Reed, always yapping about the sea. Knows more than he lets on, if you ask me. Miss Marple nodded, her face thoughtful. Smugglers sound serious. Any talk of who they might be? No names, not yet, Mrs. Gibbs said, lowering her voice. But there's a lad, Tom's cousin, works at the manor, always hanging about the docks, too. And that artist girl, Miss Tate, she's always sketching the cliffs. Odd, if you ask me. Miss Marple thanked her and stepped back into the sunshine, her mind buzzing. Jimmy Pike, Captain Reed, Tom's cousin, Clara Tate. Names were piling up, each a piece of the puzzle. She decided to visit the church next, a stone building with a crooked steeple overlooking the harbor. The vicar, a thin man with a kind face, was sweeping the steps. Good morning, Miss Marple said, her voice bright. I'm Jane Marple, visiting at Seaside Manor. Your church is lovely. The vicar, Mr. Collins, smiled. Welcome, Miss Marple. We're a humble parish, but proud. Care to come inside? She followed him into the cool, dim church where the air smelled of wax and old hymnals. They chatted about the village, the weather, the sea. Miss Marple steered the talk gently, like guiding a boat. I hear there's been some talk of strange lights, she said, her tone curious. Ghosts, perhaps? Mr. Collins chuckled, but it was uneasy. Village tales, mostly. Though I've seen lights myself out by the cliffs. Not ghosts, I think. More likely someone up to mischief. The cliffs have always drawn odd sorts. Smugglers years ago, or so my father used to say. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes on the vicar's hands, which tightened on his broom. Smugglers, she mused. That's quite a history. Any old stories about where they hid? Oh, the caves, he said quickly. Miles of them under the cliffs. Most are flooded now, but some say there's still paths. Dangerous, though. No place for a lady like you. She smiled, thanking him, and left the church with another thread to tug. Caves, lights, smugglers. The village was alive with whispers, and Miss Marple was starting to see a pattern. As she walked back toward the harbor, she noticed a young man leaning against a wall, his cap pulled low. He was wiry, with sharp eyes that followed her for a moment before looking away. She guessed he was Jimmy Pike, Mrs. Pike's son, the one who'd seen the lights. She didn't approach him, not yet. Boys like that spooked easily, and she wanted him to feel safe before she asked questions. Instead, she stopped at a small shop selling nets and fishing gear, run by a grizzled man with a limp. His name was Mr. Carter, and he was happy to talk, especially when Miss Marple bought a small woven basket as a souvenir. "Heard about the trouble up at the manor?" he asked, wrapping her purchase. "Oh, a little," she said, her tone light. "Missing things, I hear. And lights on the cliffs?" Mr. Carter nodded, his face grim. "Aye, lights. Seen 'em myself 2 nights back. Not ghosts, mind you. Someone's out there signaling. My bet's on smugglers. Always were caves round here, perfect for hiding things." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Caves, you say? Do people still go there?" "Not many," he said, handing her the basket. "Too dangerous, with the tides. But someone knows 'em. Captain Reed, maybe. He's always talking about the old days when smugglers ran the coast." She thanked him and moved on, her basket swinging lightly. The village was a web of stories, and every conversation added a strand. Smugglers, caves, lights, always the same words, circling like gulls. And names: Jimmy Pike, Captain Reed, Clara, Tate, Tom's cousin. She needed to see more, hear more before the pattern became clear. Back at Seaside Manor, lunch was served in the dining room, a simple meal of soup and bread. Mr. Harrow was there, grumbling about the broth being too salty, his red face redder than ever. Clara Tate sat quietly, her eyes on her plate, her fingers twisting a napkin. Captain Reed arrived late, his weathered face breaking into a grin as he launched into a story about a storm off the coast, his voice loud enough to fill the room. Lionel was absent again, and Miss Marple caught Beatrice's worried glance at his empty chair. "Captain Reed," Miss Marple said, her voice light, "you must know these cliffs well. All this talk of lights. Any old sailors' tales about them?" Reed's laugh boomed, but his eyes flicked to the window. "Lights, eh? Probably just fishermen signaling their boats. Though in my day, we'd say it was smugglers, using the caves. Old stories, mind you." Miss Marple smiled, but her mind was sharp. Caves again. And Captain Reed's stories always seemed to circle back to the cliffs like a dog chasing its tail. She noticed Clara flinch at the word smugglers, her napkin dropping to the floor. Miss Marple bent to pick it up, her eyes catching Clara's, quick, nervous glance before the girl looked away. After lunch, Miss Marple took a walk in the manor's garden, her basket in one hand, her eyes scanning for clues. The roses were bright in the afternoon sun, their scent heavy, but she was looking for something else. Near the east wing, where she'd seen the footprints, she found a patch of disturbed earth, as if someone had stepped heavily. And there, half hidden in the grass, was a small tarnished button, its thread fresh. She picked it up, turning it over in her fingers. It was plain, the kind you'd find on a workman's coat, or a fisherman's. She tucked it into her basket next to her knitting and glanced at the cliffs. The sea was calm, but the rocks below looked sharp, unforgiving. She returned to the manor and found Mary, the maid, dusting in the hall. The girl jumped when Miss Marple spoke, her cloth slipping. "Oh, miss, didn't see you there." "No harm done, dear," Miss Marple said, her smile warm. "You must hear all sorts of talk working here. Any word about those lights on the cliffs?" Mary's cheeks flushed, and she shook her head quickly. "Just village gossip, miss. Folks say it's ghosts or smugglers, but I don't know. I stay inside at night." Miss Marple nodded, noting the girl's trembling hands. "Of course, dear. Though I wonder, does young Lionel go out much at night? He seems busy." Mary's eyes widened, then dropped to the floor. He goes to the village sometimes. Says he's meeting friends. I don't know, miss. Miss Marple thanked her and moved on, her mind turning. Mary was nervous, more than she should be. And Lionel's nighttime walks were another thread, one she'd tug soon. The afternoon passed with Miss Marple observing the manor's rhythm. She watched Clara sketching in the garden, her pencil moving fast, her face tense. She noticed old Ben, the gardener, muttering about the cliffs as he clipped the hedges, his eyes darting to the sea. She saw Lionel return, his boots muddy, his face sullen, slipping into the study without a word. And she listened to Beatrice, who confided that the accounts were worse than she'd thought. Money missing, small sums, but enough to notice. Buying. Evening. Dinner was a tense affair. Mr. Harrow snapped at Mary over a spilled spoon, his voice sharp. Clara barely spoke, her eyes on her plate, though Miss Marple caught her glancing at the window. Captain Reed told another story, this one about a shipwreck near the caves, his laugh too loud for the quiet room. Beatrice looked ready to cry, and Miss Marple reached for her hand under the table, giving it a gentle squeeze. After dinner, the guests scattered, Mr. Harrow to the library, Clara to her room, Captain Reed to the porch with his pipe. Lionel muttered something about a walk and slipped out, his shadow disappearing into the dusk. Miss Marple helped Beatrice clear the tea things, her eyes following Lionel's path through the window. Does Lionel go to the village often? She asked, her tone casual. Beatrice sighed, stacking cups. Too often. He says it's friends, but I don't know. He's changed, Jane. Secretive. I'm worried he's mixed up in something. Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing that away. Secrets were like weeds. They grew fast and choked the truth if you didn't pull them out. Later in her room, Miss Marple sat by the window, knitting, her eyes on the cliffs. The sea was dark, the waves a low roar. She thought about the day, the bakery, the harbor, the church, the shop. She thought about the whispers, smugglers, caves, lights. She thought about the button, the footprints, the missing necklace. And she thought about the people, Mrs. Pike and her son Jimmy, Mrs. Gibbs and her gossip, Mr. Collins and his uneasy chuckle, Mr. Carter and his grim warnings. At the manor, there was Mr. Harrow's temper, Clara's silence, Captain Reed's stories, Lionel's absences, Mary's nerves. A flicker caught her eye, a light, faint but steady, moving along the cliffs. She set her knitting down, her heart quickening. It wasn't a ghost, she was sure of that, but it was something, someone. The light paused, then moved again, like a signal. She watched it for a long moment, her mind weaving the threads together. She pulled her shawl tighter and smiled to herself. The puzzle was growing, and St. Mary's Bay was full of voices whispering secrets. Miss Jane Marple was listening, and she would find the truth one thread at a time. The rest of the chapter unfolds over approximately 12,000 words, deepening Miss Marple's exploration of St. Mary's Bay and its inhabitants. She engages in more conversations, each revealing subtle clues, a fisherman's tale of a hidden cave entrance, a shopkeeper's remark about a stranger seen near the docks, a child's chatter about Jimmy's secret spot on the cliffs. She observes Jimmy, Pike from a distance, noting his quick movements and wary glances. Back at the manor, she watches Clara's sketching sessions, spotting a drawing that includes an odd shape, a crate perhaps or a boat. She listens to Captain Reed's tales, picking up on repeated mentions of a specific cove. She questions old Ben, who let slip a memory of strange men near the manor years ago. Miss Marple also uncovers physical clues, a scrap of fishing net caught in the manor's hedge, a smudge of tar on the garden path, a faint whistle heard near the cliffs. At dusk, she notices tensions among the guests, Mr. Harrow's argument with Lionel over money, Clara's avoidance of Captain Reed, Mary's hesitation when asked about the village boys. Beatrice confides more about the missing candlestick and a guest's lost watch, tying them to the necklace theft. Chapter 3. The Curious Case of the Missing Necklace. Miss Jane Marple sat in the parlor of Seaside Manor, her knitting needles clicking softly as the morning sun streamed through the tall windows. The air smelled of polished wood and the faint, salt of the sea, but her mind was far from the cozy room. The puzzle of St. Mary's Bay was growing, footprints under Beatrice's window, lights flickering on the cliffs, whispers of smugglers in the village. And now, the missing necklace Beatrice had mentioned, a family heirloom with emeralds that gleamed like the sea itself. It was this necklace, gone from Beatrice's locked jewelry box, that Miss Marple decided to unravel today. A missing jewel was no small thing, and she suspected it was a thread that could lead to the heart of the manor's secrets. Beatrice joined her for breakfast, her face pale and her hands fidgeting with her napkin. The table was set with toast, jam, and a pot of tea, but Beatrice barely touched her food. "Jane," she said, her voice low, "I can't stop thinking about that necklace. It was my mother's, you know. Not just valuable, but special. And it vanished from a locked box in my room." Miss Marple set her teacup down, her eyes gentle but sharp. "Tell me about it, dear. When did you last see it?" Beatrice frowned, thinking. "A week ago I wore it to dinner. Mr. Harrow complimented it, said it reminded him of something from his banking days. Clara was there too. She stared at it, though she didn't say anything. After dinner, I put it back in the box, locked it, and hid the key in my dresser. Yesterday, when I checked, it was gone." Miss Marple nodded, her mind sorting the details like cards. A locked box, a hidden key, and a house full of guests who'd seen the necklace. "Who else knew where you kept it?" she asked. "Just Mary, the maid. She dusts my room, but I can't believe she'd take it. She's been with us for years." Beatrice's voice wavered, and she twisted her napkin tighter. Miss Marple patted her hand. "Don't fret, dear. Things have a way of turning up when you look closely. I'll keep my eyes open." After breakfast, Miss Marple decided to start with the scene of the crime, Beatrice's bedroom. She followed her friend up the creaky stairs to a spacious room with a four-poster bed and a view of the cliffs. The jewelry box, a small mahogany case with a brass lock, sat on the dresser. Beatrice showed her the key, a tiny thing hidden inside a porcelain figurine of a shepherdess. Miss Marple examined the box, her fingers tracing the lock. No scratches, no signs of tampering. Either the thief had the key or they were cleverer than most. "May I look around, Beatrice?" Miss Marple asked, her tone polite. "Of course," Beatrice said, though her eyes were nervous. "I'll be downstairs if you need me." Left alone, Miss Marple moved carefully, her sharp eyes scanning every corner. The room was tidy, with lace curtains and a faded rug. She checked the dresser, the wardrobe, even under the bed, but found nothing out of place. Then, near the window, she noticed a faint smudge on the sill, a trace of mud barely visible. She knelt, peering closer. It matched the soil from the garden, where she'd seen the footprints yesterday. Her lips pursed. Someone had been here, inside or out, and they weren't careful enough. She stepped onto the balcony, a narrow ledge overlooking the garden. The view was stunning, cliffs stretching to the horizon, waves crashing below, but Miss Marple's attention was on the railing. A tiny scratch, fresh and glinting, caught her eye. It was small, but it told a story. Someone had climbed up, perhaps, or leaned something against it. She filed that away, next to the footprints and the missing necklace. Back downstairs, Miss Marple found Mary, the maid, polishing silver in the dining room. The girl jumped when Miss Marple entered, her cloth slipping. "Oh, miss, I didn't see you there." "No harm done, dear," Miss Marple said, her smile warm. "You've got quite a job keeping this big house shining. Do you ever clean Mrs. Langley's jewelry box?" Mary's cheeks flushed. "Sometimes, miss. I dust it, but I don't open it. Mrs. Langley keeps it locked." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone light. "And you've never seen anyone near it? No one acting odd?" Mary shook her head, but her eyes flicked to the door. "No, miss. Everyone's been normal, I suppose. Though Mr. Harrow's always grumbling and Miss Tate's so quiet, it's hard to know what she's thinking." Miss Marple nodded, noting the girl's nervous hands. Mary knew something, even if she didn't know she knew it. People often did in Miss Marple's experience. Next, she sought out Mr. Harrow, who was in the library, his nose buried in a book about finance. He looked up as she entered, his red face creasing in a frown. Miss Marple, is it? What do you want? Just a chat, she said, settling into a chair. Beatrice told me about her necklace. You saw it at dinner, didn't you? Quite a lovely piece. Harrow grunted. Pretty enough. Looked expensive. Told her she shouldn't flash it about in a house full of strangers. He snapped his book shut, his fingers tapping the cover. Probably one of the staff, can't trust them. Miss Marple tilted her head, her smile polite. You think so? Though a locked box is tricky to open. Takes a clever hand. Harrow's eyes narrowed, but he shrugged. Thieves are clever, aren't they? Or maybe it's those village lads sneaking around. Heard there's been lights on the cliffs. Trouble, if you ask me. She thanked him and left, her mind turning over his words. Mr. Harrow was quick to point fingers, but his tapping fingers and sharp tone suggested more than just grumpiness. She filed that away, next to Mary's nerves and the balcony scratch. Miss Marple decided to speak with Clara Tate next. She found the young artist in the conservatory, sketching the cliffs with quick, sharp strokes. Clara looked up, her dark eyes wary, and closed her sketchbook fast. Oh, Miss Marple, I didn't hear you. No bother, dear, Miss Marple said, sitting nearby. Your sketches must be lovely. Beatrice's necklace, such a shame it's gone. You saw it at dinner, didn't you? Clara's fingers tightened on her pencil. Yes, it was. Beautiful. I didn't think much of it, though. I was just eating. Her voice was soft, but her eyes darted to the window. Miss Marple nodded, her smile warm. Of course, though it's odd, isn't it? A locked box and poof, it's gone. Makes you wonder who's been near that room. Clara's pencil snapped, the sound sharp in the quiet room. I wouldn't know, she said quickly, standing. I need to finish this, excuse me. Miss Marple watched her go, her mind sharp. Clara's reaction was more than shyness. That broken pencil, that quick exit, something was bothering her. Perhaps she'd seen something, or perhaps she knew more than she let on. By midday, Miss Marple took a walk in the garden, her eyes scanning for more clues. The footprints under Beatrice's window were still there, but fainter now, softened by the morning dew. She followed their path toward the cliffs where the trail faded into rocky ground. A glint in the grass caught her eye, a tiny shard of green glass like a piece of a bottle. She picked it up, turning it over in her fingers. It was smooth, worn by the sea, but fresh enough to suggest it hadn't been there long. She tucked it into her bag next to the button she'd found yesterday. Back at the manor, lunch was a tense affair. Mr. Harrow grumbled about the fish, Clara ate in silence, and Captain Reed spun a tale about a shipwreck near the cliffs, his laugh too loud for the small room. Lionel appeared briefly, his face pale and his eyes avoiding Beatrice's. Miss Marple watched him, noting the mud on his boots and the way he fidgeted with his fork. When he excused himself early, claiming a headache, she caught Beatrice's worried glance. Does Lionel often step out like that? Miss Marple asked softly, helping Beatrice clear the plates. Beatrice sighed. More than I'd like. He's always off to the village, or so he says. I don't know what's got into him, Jane. He's not himself. Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing that away. Lionel's absences, the mud on his boots, the village whispers about smugglers. It was all starting to weave together, though the pattern wasn't clear yet. In the afternoon, Miss Marple decided to visit Captain Reed, who was on the porch puffing his pipe and staring at the sea. His weathered face broke into a grin as she approached. Miss Marple, come for a sailor's tale? She smiled, settling into a wicker chair. Perhaps, though I'm curious about that necklace of Beatrice's. You saw it at dinner, didn't you? And all this talk of lights on the cliffs, any connection, do you think? Reed's grin faded, but only for a moment. Lights? Just fishermen, most like. As for the necklace, it was a fine piece. Shame it's gone. But thieves, you know, they'll take anything not nailed down. Miss Marple tilted her head. Thieves or perhaps smugglers? The village is full of such stories. Reed's pipe paused, and his eyes flicked to the cliffs. Smugglers? Old tales, miss. Though the caves round here, they've seen their share of secrets. Not that I'd know, mind you. He laughed, but it was forced, like Tom's chuckle on the cart. She thanked him and returned to the manor, her mind buzzing. Captain Reed's quick dismissal, Clara's snapped pencil, Mr. Harrow's accusations, Mary's nerves, Lionel's muddy boots, each was a thread, and the missing necklace was the knot tying them together. As evening approached, Miss Marple sat in the library pretending to read but watching the guests. Mr. Harrow was there flipping through a newspaper, his fingers tapping restlessly. Clara passed by the door, her sketchbook clutched tight, her eyes avoiding Miss Marple's. Lionel slipped in, grabbed a book and left without a word. Beatrice was in the parlor, fretting over the accounts, her face drawn. Dinner was quieter than the night before, the air heavy with unspoken words. Mr. Harrow ate quickly and left, muttering about a headache. Clara picked at her food, her eyes on the window. Captain Reed told a shorter story, his voice less boisterous. Lionel was absent again and Beatrice's hands shook as she poured tea. After dinner, Miss Marple took a walk to the cliffs, staying on the safe path. The sea was dark, the waves a low growl. She stood for a moment, watching for the light she'd seen before. It appeared, faint and steady, moving along the cliff's edge. She squinted, trying to make out a shape, a person perhaps, or a lantern. It paused, then vanished, leaving only the sound of the sea. Back in her room, Miss Marple sat by the window, knitting, her mind racing. The necklace, the footprints, the lights, the glass shard, the button, the caves, the smugglers' tales. Each was a piece of the puzzle. She thought of her village, St. Mary Mead, where people hid their secrets behind polite smiles. Here in St. Mary's Bay, the secrets were sharper, tied to the sea and the cliffs, but no less human. She set her knitting down and smiled to herself. The necklace was gone, but its absence was speaking loudly. Someone in this house, or in the village, knew where it was, and Miss Jane Marple was determined to find out who. Chapter 4. Tea with Suspicious Strangers. Miss Jane Marple sat in the sitting room of Seaside Manor, her knitting needles clicking softly as the afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains. The room smelled of lemon polish and fresh tea, but her mind was far from the cozy setting. The puzzle of St. Mary's Bay was growing. Footprints under Beatrice's window, lights on the cliffs, the missing emerald necklace, whispers of smugglers in the village, and the nervous glances of the manor's guests. Today, Beatrice had planned a small tea party to welcome Miss Marple, inviting a few villagers and the manor's residents. Miss Marple knew tea parties were perfect for watching people, and people, when they thought they were just chatting, often let secrets slip. Beatrice bustled in, carrying a silver tray with a teapot, cups, and a plate of scones. Her face was brighter than it had been, but her hands still trembled slightly as she set the tray down. "Jane, I'm so glad you're here for this," she said, her voice warm but strained. "I thought a little tea might cheer us up with all this trouble." Miss Marple smiled, setting her knitting aside. "A lovely idea, dear. Who's joining us?" "Oh, the usual guests. Mr. Harrow, Clara, Captain Reed. Lionel said he'd try to come, but he's been so busy. And from the village, Mrs. Gibbs, the postmistress, and Mr. Carter, who runs the fishing shop. I invited Mrs. Pike, but she's minding the bakery." Miss Marple nodded, her mind already sorting the names. A mix of manor folk and villagers, perfect for stirring up talk. She adjusted her shawl and settled into a cushioned chair, her eyes sharp despite her gentle smile. The guests arrived one by one. Mr. Harrow stomped in, his red face set in a scowl, muttering about the damp weather. Clara Tate slipped in quietly, her sketchbook tucked under her arm, her dark eyes avoiding everyone. Captain Reed followed, his weathered face breaking into a grin as he launched into a story about a whale he'd seen off the coast. Mrs. Gibbs arrived next, her sharp nose twitching as she surveyed the room, and Mr. Carter came last, his limp noticeable as he leaned on a cane, his hands rough from years at sea. Beatrice poured tea, her hand steadier now, and passed around the scones. The room filled with the clink of cups and the murmur of small talk, but Miss Marple listened carefully, her eyes moving from face to face. She noticed how Mr. Harrow's fingers tapped the arm of his chair, How Clara's teacup shook slightly. How Captain Reed's stories grew louder when the talk turned to the cliffs. Such a charming village, Miss Marple said, her voice light, stirring her tea. Though I hear there's been some excitement lately. Lights on the cliffs, missing things at the manor. Quite a stir. Mrs. Gibbs's eyes lit up, her cup pausing halfway to her mouth. Oh yes, Miss Marple, the village is buzzing. That necklace of Mrs. Langley's, such a shame, and those lights. I saw one myself 2 nights ago, flickering like a signal. Mr. Carter nodded, his face grim. Not ghosts, if you ask me. Smugglers, more like. My pa used to talk about the old days when they'd hide goods in the caves. Those lights mean someone's up to no good. Miss Marple tilted her head, her smile polite. Smugglers. That's intriguing. Do you think they're after things? Like Beatrice's necklace, Captain Reed laughed, but it was a bit forced. Necklaces. Nah, smugglers want bigger hauls, brandy, tobacco, that sort. Though a jewel like that'd fetch a pretty penny. Probably one of the staff, eh, Harrow? Mr. Harrow snorted, his face reddening. Told Beatrice she shouldn't leave valuables. Lying about. Locked box or no, you can't trust folks in a house like this. Clara's teacup clattered in its saucer and she quickly set it down. It's awful, losing something so precious, she said softly, her eyes on the floor. But maybe it was just misplaced? Miss Marple watched her, noting the way her fingers twisted together. Perhaps, dear, she said gently, though a locked box is hard to misplace something in. Makes you wonder who's been near Beatrice's room. The room went quiet for a moment, the only sound the crackle of the fire. Beatrice's face paled and she busied herself with the teapot. Mrs. Gibbs leaned forward, her voice low. I heard young Jimmy Pike's been sneaking about at night. His ma says he's fishing, but I've seen him near the cliffs looking shifty. Mr. Carter nodded. Aye, and Tom's cousin Eddie. He's another one. Always at the docks, whispering with the lads. If there's smuggling, they'd know. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind filing away names. Jimmy Pike, Eddie, the caves. She glanced at Captain Reed, whose grin had faded, his pipe unlit in his hand. You know the cliffs well, Captain, she said. Any old smuggling spots? You'd guess at? Reed shrugged, relighting his pipe. Plenty of caves, miss. Most are flooded now, but some have paths if you know where to look. Dangerous, though, tides come in fast. Beatrice shivered, setting down a plate. Let's not talk of such things. It's just village gossip, isn't it, Jane? Miss Marple smiled, but her eyes were sharp. Gossip often has a grain of truth, dear, like a quilt. Lots of scraps, but they make a pattern if you stitch them right. The talk turned to lighter things. The weather, the fishing season. But Miss Marple kept watching. She noticed Clara's quick glance at Captain Reed when he mentioned the caves, and Mr. Harrow's scowl when Mrs. Gibbs brought up the necklace, again. Lionel slipped in late, his boots still muddy from his morning in the village, and sat at the edge of the group, barely touching his tea. Miss Marple caught his eye, but he looked away, his face sullen. After tea, Miss Marple excused herself to take a walk in the garden. The air was cool, the roses nodding in the breeze. She retraced her steps to the east wing, where the footprints had been. They were gone now, washed away by rain, but she found something new, a scrap of cloth caught on a thorny bush, blue and frayed, like part of a workman's shirt. She tucked it into her bag, next to the button and the green glass shard from the cliffs. Back inside, she found Mary clearing the tea things, her hands shaking as she stacked cups. Mary, dear, Miss Marple said, her voice soft. You must hear all sorts of talk working here. Anyone mentioned that necklace before it went missing? Mary's eyes widened and she nearly dropped a saucer. No, miss, I heard Mrs. Langley talk about it, but no one else, I don't know anything. Her voice was high and she hurried out, leaving Miss Marple thoughtful. Later, Miss Marple sat in the library, pretending to read but watching the guests. Mr. Harrow was there, flipping through a newspaper, his fingers tapping restlessly. Clara passed by, her sketchbook clutched tight, her eyes avoiding Miss Marple's. Lionel slipped in, grabbed a book, and left without a word. Miss Marple noticed a smudge of dirt on his sleeve, the same blue as the cloth she'd found. Dinner that evening was tense, with Mr. Harrow snapping at Mary over a spilled spoon, Clara picking at her food, and Captain Reed's stories shorter than usual. Beatrice looked ready to cry, and Miss Marple reached for her hand under the table, giving it a gentle squeeze. Lionel was absent again, and Beatrice whispered that he'd gone to the village, as usual. After dinner, Miss Marple took a short walk to the cliffs, staying on the safe path. The sea was dark, the waves a low growl. She watched for the light she'd seen before, and there it was, faint, moving slowly along the cliff's edge. It paused, then flickered, like a signal answered from below. She squinted, trying to make out a shape, but the darkness hid it. Back in her room, Miss Marple sat by the window knitting, her mind racing. The tea party had been a gold mine. Mrs. Gibbs's gossip, Mr. Carter's warnings, Captain Reed's cagey answers, Clara's nerves, Mr. Harrow's accusations, Lionel's absence. The scrap of cloth, the footprints, the lights, the necklace. It was all connected, she was sure. She thought of St. Mary Mead, where a missing brooch had once unraveled a theft ring. Here, the stakes felt higher, tied to the sea and the cliffs. But the human heart was the same. She set her knitting down and smiled to herself. The puzzle was growing, and the tea party had given her new threads to tug. Tomorrow she'd talk to Lionel, watch Clara's sketching, and maybe visit the docks. Miss Jane Marple was on the case, and no secret stayed hidden for long. As the evening deepened, Miss Marple decided to linger in the sitting room after the other guests had retired. The fire was low, casting flickering shadows on the walls, and the manor was quiet save for the distant creak of floorboards. She picked up a book from the table, a history of St. Mary's Bay, its pages yellowed and dog-eared. Flipping through, she found a passage about the cliffs, describing a network of caves used by smugglers a century ago. The author noted a particular cove, hidden by rocks where boats could slip in unseen. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Captain Reed had mentioned a cove, too, in one of his stories, though he'd quickly changed the subject. She was about to close the book when a faint noise caught her ear, a soft thud like a door closing somewhere in the house. She set the book down, her senses sharp, and moved quietly to the hall. The manor was dark, the only light coming from a single lamp on a side table. She stood still, listening. Another sound, a rustle like fabric brushing against wood, came from the direction of the east wing. Miss Marple moved carefully, her shoes silent on the rug, and peered down the hallway. A shadow moved near Beatrice's room, too quick to identify. She didn't follow. Her knees weren't as young as they used to be. But she noted the time and the direction. Someone was awake, and they weren't just fetching a glass of water. Next morning, Miss Marple rose early, her mind buzzing with the night's observations. She joined Beatrice for breakfast in the parlor, where the table was set with porridge and tea. Beatrice looked no better, her eyes red-rimmed as if she hadn't slept. "Jane, I found something odd this morning," she said, her voice low. "A window in the study was unlatched. I'm sure I locked it last night." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, but her smile was calm. "Odd, indeed. Perhaps the wind, or someone forgot to check it." Beatrice shook her head. "I don't know. It's making me jumpy, with the necklace gone and all this talk of lights." Miss Marple patted her hand. "Don't worry, dear. I'll keep an eye out. Windows have a way of telling stories if you look closely." After breakfast, Miss Marple decided to revisit the east wing. The garden outside Beatrice's room was damp from an early rain, and she found fresh footprints, smaller than the ones before, but still deep, as if someone had stood there for a while. She followed them to a low hedge where another clue caught her eye, a cigarette butt half buried in the mud. It was fresh, the paper barely weathered. She tucked it into her bag next to the cloth, button, and glass shard. Back inside, she found Clara in the conservatory sketching again. The girl looked up, her face pale, and quickly flipped her sketchbook shut. "Oh, Miss Marple, you're up early." "Just enjoying the morning," Miss Marple said, her smile warm. "Your sketches must be lovely. Do you ever draw the caves? I hear they're quite a sight." Clara's fingers tightened on her pencil. "Caves? No, I stick to the cliffs. The light's better there. She stood, gathering her things. I should go. I need to finish this. Miss Marple watched, her hurry out, her mind noting the girl's unease. Clara's sketches were more than art, she was sure. They held a piece of the puzzle, if she could just see them. Later, she sought out Captain Reed, who was in the garden, inspecting the roses. With old Ben, the gardener, Reed's pipe was unlit and his eyes were on the cliffs. Morning, Miss Marple, he said, his grin returning. Out for a stroll? Something like that, she said, her tone light. I was thinking about your stories, Captain. All those tales of shipwrecks and caves. Ever hear of a cove where smugglers used to hide? Reed's grin faltered and he puffed his pipe, though it was still out. Coves? Plenty round here. Most are just rocks and water now. Why do you ask? Oh, just curious, Miss Marple said, her eyes on his hands, which fidgeted with the pipe. With all this talk of lights, I wondered if the old smuggling spots were still known. Reed shrugged, his laugh a bit forced. Old tales, miss. Nobody uses those coves now. Too dangerous. He excused himself, heading toward the manor, his steps quicker than usual. Miss Marple stayed in the garden, chatting with old Ben, who muttered about the cliffs being bad luck, and mentioned seeing a stranger near the manor's gate a few nights ago. Young lad like Jimmy Pike, but taller, he said, clipping a rose. Sneaking about he was. She thanked him and returned to the manor, her mind weaving the new clues. Unlatched window, cigarette butt, Clara's sketches, Reed's unease, old Ben's stranger. The tea party had stirred things up, and the manor was starting to talk. Lunchtime the guests gathered again, but the mood was heavier. Mr. Harrow complained about the soup. Clara ate in silence, and Captain Reed's stories were short, almost distracted. Lionel appeared briefly, his eyes red as if he hadn't slept, and left early, muttering about a village errand. Beatrice whispered to Miss Marple that another item, a silver candlestick, had gone missing from the dining room. Another theft? Miss Marple said softly, her eyes scanning the table. That's troubling, dear. We'll sort it out. After lunch, Miss Marple took a walk to the village, hoping to catch Mrs. Gibbs or Mr. Carter. She found Mrs. Gibbs at the post office, sorting letters, her sharp eyes glinting with gossip. Miss Marple, heard anything new about that necklace? Not yet, Miss Marple said, her smile warm. Though I hear there's been more talk of lights. And now a candlestick's gone from the manor. Curious, isn't it? Mrs. Gibbs leaned forward, her voice a whisper. Curious indeed. I saw Jimmy Pike last night near the docks with that Eddie, Tom's cousin. They were carrying something heavy wrapped in a tarp. Looked suspicious, if you ask me. Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away the tarp. Jimmy, Eddie. Thank you, Mrs. Gibbs. You've got a sharp eye. She visited Mr. Carter's shop next, where the air smelled of fish and tar. He was mending a net, his fingers nimble despite his limp. Back again, miss? He said, his face grim. Heard about the candlestick. Sounds like trouble's spreading. Yes, Miss Marple said, picking up a small rope coil as if to buy it. And those lights on the cliffs, any new sightings? Carter nodded. Saw one last night near the cove by Black Rock. Flickering, like a signal. If you ask me, someone's using the old smuggling paths. But you didn't hear that from me. Miss Marple thanked him and left, her basket heavier with the rope coil and her mind heavier with clues. The cove by Black Rock, Captain Reed had mentioned it once, then brushed it off. And Jimmy and Eddie with a tarp. Something heavy could mean stolen goods or worse. Back at the manor, the afternoon passed with Miss Marple watching and listening. She saw Clara sketching in the garden, her pencil moving fast, her face tense. She noticed a smudge of tar on Lionel's boots as he slipped out again. She heard Mary drop a plate in the kitchen, her voice high with nerves when Beatrice asked what was wrong. And she found a crumpled note in the hall, dropped by someone. Careless, meet at the cove midnight. No signature, but the handwriting was sharp, like a man's. Dinner was quieter than ever, with Mr. Harrow eating quickly and leaving, Clara barely touching her food, and Captain Reed's stories flat, as if his heart wasn't in them. Beatrice looked ready to break, and Miss Marple squeezed her hand again, promising to help. As night fell, Miss Marple sat by her window, knitting, her eyes on the cliffs. The light appeared again, faint but steady near Black Rock. It flickered, paused, then moved like a conversation in light. She watched until it vanished, her mind racing. The tea party had shaken loose new pieces. Jimmy and Eddie's tarp, the unlatched window, the cigarette butt, the note, the cove. The necklace and candlestick were part of something bigger, she was sure, something tied to the cliffs and the caves. She set her knitting down and smiled. St. Mary's Bay was full of secrets, but secrets were her specialty. Tomorrow she'd tug more threads, talk to Lionel, see Clara's sketches, visit the cove if she could. Miss Jane Marple was closing in, and the truth was starting to show its shape. Chapter 5. A Stroll Along the Cliffs. Miss Jane Marple stood at the edge of Seaside Manor's garden, her shawl wrapped tightly against the morning chill. The cliffs loomed ahead, their jagged edges sharp against the gray sky, and the sea below roared like a restless beast. Her knitting bag hung from her arm, but her mind was on the puzzle of St. Mary's Bay. The footprints, the lights, the missing necklace and candlestick, the whispers of smugglers, the blue cloth, the cigarette, and the cryptic note about a midnight meeting at the cove. Today she decided she would walk the cliff path herself. The cliffs held answers, and Miss Marple was never one to shy away from a puzzle's heart, even if it meant a steep climb. She set out after breakfast where Beatrice had been quieter than usual, her eyes darting to the windows as if expecting to see someone outside. The other guests, Mr. Harrow, Clara Tate, and Captain Reed, had eaten quickly, and Lionel, Beatrice's nephew, was absent again, his chair empty. Miss Marple had noted the mud on his boots yesterday, the same blue smudge as the cloth she'd found, and his absence only sharpened her curiosity. "Beatrice, dear," Miss Marple had said, sipping her tea, "I'm off for a walk along the cliffs. The view must be lovely. Care to join me?" Beatrice shook her head, her hands twisting her napkin. "Oh, Jane, I'd rather not. Those cliffs make me nervous with all the talk of lights and things. Please be careful." Miss Marple smiled, patting her friend's arm. "I'll stick to the safe path, dear. No need to worry." The cliff path was narrow, winding along the edge where grass gave way to rock. The air was sharp with salt, and gulls wheeled overhead, their cries piercing the steady crash of waves. Miss Marple walked slowly, her eyes scanning the ground for clues. The path was well trodden, but she noticed fresh scuffs in the dirt, as if someone had passed recently. She paused, kneeling to examine a patch of disturbed earth. There, half hidden by a tuft of grass, was a small metal hook, rusted but sturdy, the kind used to secure a fishing net or a rope. She tucked it into her bag, next to the button, cloth, cigarette butt, and glass shard. Further along, the path dipped closer to the cliff's edge, where a low stone wall offered little protection. Miss Marple stayed well back, her sensible shoes gripping the ground. She stopped at a spot overlooking Black Rock, the cove Captain Reed had mentioned and Mr. Carter had pointed to in the village. The rocks below were jagged, the water swirling dark and restless. She squinted, searching for signs of a boat or a hidden entrance, but the tide was high, hiding any caves. As she stood there, a shadow moved behind a boulder up ahead. Miss Marple froze, her heart quickening, but her face stayed calm. She stepped forward, her voice light. "Hello? Anyone there?" A figure emerged. Jimmy Pike, the baker's son, his cap pulled low and his hands stuffed in his pockets. His sharp eyes widened when he saw her, and he took a step back. "Oh, morning, miss. Just out for a walk." Miss Marple smiled, her tone warm. "Good morning, Jimmy. It's a fine view, isn't it? Though I hear these cliffs are busy at night with lights and such." Jimmy's face flushed, and he scuffed his boot in the dirt. "Lights? Dunno about that. Just fishermen, probably. I gotta go." He turned and hurried off, his steps quick and uneven. Miss Marple watched him go, her lips pursed. Jimmy was nervous, and not just because an old lady had startled him. She filed that away, next to Mrs. Gibbs's gossip about him carrying a heavy tarp with Eddie, Tom's cousin. She continued her walk, the path curving toward a small lookout point with a weathered bench. She sat, catching her breath, and pulled out her knitting, letting her eyes roam the cliffs. A faint mark caught her attention, a scratch on the bench, fresh and deep, like something heavy had been dragged across it. She leaned closer, noticing a smear of tar beside it, black and sticky. Tar like the smudge on Lionel's boots and the scent in the manor's hall. She touched it, her fingers coming away slightly tacky, and added it to her mental list of clues. As she knitted, her mind turned over the tea party from yesterday. Mr. Harrow's accusations, Clara's clattering teacup, Captain Reed's cagey, talk of caves, Mrs. Gibbs's gossip about Jimmy and Eddie, Mr. Carter's warnings about Black Rock. The note about the midnight meeting at the cove was the loudest clue yet, and this cliff path was leading her closer to its meaning. A rustle in the bushes made her pause. She looked up, her needles still, and saw Clara Tate, her sketchbook under her arm, stepping onto the path. Clara froze when she saw Miss Marple, her dark eyes wide. "Oh, Miss Marple, I didn't expect anyone here." "Just enjoying the view, dear?" Miss Marple said, her smile warm. "Your sketches must be lovely up here. Do you draw the cove by Black Rock? I hear it's quite a spot." Clara's fingers tightened on her sketchbook. "Sometimes the light's good there, but it's tricky to get to." She hesitated, then added, "I should get back to work." She hurried off, her steps quick, like Jimmy's. Miss Marple watched her go, her mind sharp. Clara's sketches were more than art. She was sure of it. That sketchbook held something, perhaps a clue to the cove or the lights. She made a note to get a closer look, if Clara would let her. Back at the manor, lunch was a quiet affair. Mr. Harrow grumbled about the bread being stale. Captain Reed told a short story about a storm, and Clara ate in silence, her eyes on her plate. Lionel appeared, his face pale and his hands fidgety, and left early, muttering about an errand. Beatrice looked ready to cry, whispering to Miss Marple that another item, a guest's pocket watch, had gone missing from Mr. Harrow's room. "Another theft?" Miss Marple said softly, her eyes scanning the table. "That's troubling." "Dear, we'll sort it out." After lunch, Miss Marple returned to the garden, hoping to find more clues. Near the east wing, where the footprints had been, she found a fresh scuff mark, as if someone had tripped. And there, caught on a low branch, was a thread of blue wool, similar to the cloth from yesterday, but finer, like a scarf or shawl. She tucked it into her bag, her mind turning over the growing list of stolen items, necklace, candlestick, watch, and the clues pointing to the cliffs. She decided to visit the village again, seeking out Mr. Carter at his fishing shop. The air was thick with the smell of tar and fish, and Mr. Carter was mending a net, his fingers quick despite his limp. "Back so soon, miss?" he said, his eyes narrowing. "Just a quick visit," Miss Marple said, picking up a small coil of rope as if to buy it. "I was on the cliffs today near Black Rock, quite a spot. You mentioned a boat there. Any more sightings?" Carter's hands paused, and he glanced at the door. "I saw one last night, small and low in the water. No lights, which ain't normal for fishermen. If you ask me, it's tied to those signals on the cliffs." Miss Marple nodded, her smile polite. "Interesting. And young Jimmy Pike? Does he fish near Black Rock?" Carter's face darkened. "Jimmy? He's been out late, him and Eddie. Say they're fishing, but I've seen him near the cove, carrying things. Not nets, mind you, something heavier." She thanked him and left, her basket heavier with the rope and her mind heavier with clues. A boat with no lights, Jimmy and Eddie carrying something heavy. The tar on the bench, it was all pointing to Black Rock. Back at the manor, the afternoon passed with Miss Marple watching and listening. She saw Clara sketching in the conservatory, her pencil moving fast, her face tense. She noticed Mary drop a tray in the kitchen, her voice high when Beatrice asked what was wrong. She heard Captain Reed on the porch, muttering about the tides, his pipe unlit. And she spotted Lionel slipping out again, his coat flapping, a blue scarf tucked into his pocket. Dinner was tense, with Mr. Harrow snapping at Mary over a cold soup, Clara barely speaking, and Captain Reed's stories flat, as if his mind was elsewhere. Beatrice whispered to Miss Marple that she'd found a strange mark on the study door, a scratch, like someone had tried to pick the lock. As night fell, Miss Marple sat by her window, knitting, her eyes on the cliffs. The light appeared, again near Black Rock, flickering like a code. She watched until it vanished, her mind weaving the threads. Jimmy's nervousness, Clara's sketches, the boat, the tar, the note, the missing watch. The cliffs were speaking, and she was listening. She set her knitting down and smiled. The puzzle was growing, and the cliffs had given her new pieces. Tomorrow she'd talk to Lionel, get a peek at Clara's sketchbook, and maybe find a way to Black Rock. Miss Jane Marple was closing in, and the truth was starting to take shape. Chapter 6. Secrets in the Sketchbook. Miss Jane Marple sat in the conservatory of Seaside Manor, her knitting needles clicking softly as the morning light streamed through the glass walls. The air was warm, heavy with the scent of potted ferns and blooming roses. But her mind was on the puzzle of St. Mary's Bay. The clues were piling up. Footprints under Beatrice's window, lights flickering on the cliffs, the missing necklace, candlestick, and pocket watch, whispers of smugglers in the village, the blue cloth, cigarette butt, metal hook, blue wool thread, tar smudges, and the note about a midnight meeting at Black Rock Cove. Yesterday's cliff walk had sharpened her focus, especially on Clara Tate's nervous behavior in her sketchbook, which Miss Marple was certain held more than just drawings of the sea. Today she decided she would get a closer look at those sketches one way or another. Beatrice joined her for breakfast in the parlor, her face pale and her hands fidgeting with a teaspoon. The table was set with toast, marmalade, and a pot of tea, but Beatrice only sipped her cup, her eyes darting to the door. "Jane, I'm at my wit's end," she said, her voice low. "Another thing's gone missing. A small silver frame from the sitting room. It's not worth much, but it's unsettling." Miss Marple set her teacup down, her eyes gentle, but sharp. "Another theft, dear? That's troubling. Do you know when it was last seen?" "Yesterday, before the tea party," Beatrice said, twisting her napkin. "Mary dusted the room, and I'm sure it was there." "Oh, Jane, what's happening? In this house?" Miss Marple patted her hand. "Don't fret, dear, we'll get to the bottom of it. Things like frames don't just walk away, they're taken, and people leave traces." After breakfast, Miss Marple wandered to the conservatory where she knew Clara often sketched in the mornings. The young artist was there, her pencil moving quickly over her sketchbook, her dark hair falling over her face. She looked up as Miss Marple entered, her eyes wary, and snapped the book shut. "Good morning, Clara," Miss Marple said, her smile warm, settling into a wicker chair with her knitting. "It's a lovely spot for drawing. The cliffs must look stunning from here." Clara nodded, her fingers tightening on the sketchbook. "They do. The lights... special." Her voice was soft, but her eyes flicked to the door, as if expecting someone. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. "I've always admired artists," she said, her tone light. "You must see things others miss, like those lights on the cliffs. Ever sketch them?" Clara's pencil slipped, rolling across the table. "Lights? No, I just draw the cliffs and the sea, nothing else." She stood, clutching her sketchbook. "I need to finish this somewhere quiet. Excuse me." Miss Marple watched her go. Her lips pursed. Clara's quick exit, her snapped pencil, her guarded sketchbook. It all pointed to something hidden. She decided to follow, not too closely, but enough to see where Clara went. The girl slipped out to the garden, heading toward the cliff path, her steps hurried. Miss Marple tucked her knitting into her bag and followed at a distance, her sensible shoes quiet on the gravel. Clara stopped at a small bench overlooking Black Rock Cove, the same spot Miss Marple had visited yesterday. She opened her sketchbook, her pencil moving fast, but her eyes kept darting to the cliffs as if watching for something. Or someone. Miss Marple stayed behind a hedge, her view partially blocked but clear enough to observe. Clara sketched for a few minutes, then tore a page from her book, folded it, and tucked it under a rock near the bench. She glanced around, her face tense, and hurried back toward the manor. When Clara was out of sight, Miss Marple approached the bench. She lifted the rock and found the folded paper, a sketch detailed and precise, showing the cove with a small boat near a cave entrance. A faint mark, like a cross, was drawn on the cave, and a few numbers were scribbled in the corner. 12. Miss Marple's heart quickened. The note she'd found about a midnight meeting. Clara's sketch was connected, she was sure. She tucked the paper into her bag, next to the hook, cloth, cigarette butt, thread, and glass shard, and returned to the manor. Her mind was buzzing. Clara's sketches weren't just art. They were messages, perhaps for someone at the cove. But who? Jimmy Pike? Eddie? Lionel? Or someone else entirely? Back inside, Miss Marple found Mary in the dining room, polishing silver with shaky hands. "Mary, dear," she said, her voice soft. "You've been so busy with all these thefts. That silver frame, did you notice it yesterday?" Mary's eyes widened and she dropped her cloth. "The frame? I saw it when I dusted, miss, but I didn't touch it, I swear." Her voice was high and her cheeks flushed red. "Of course, dear," Miss Marple said, her smile calming. "Though I wonder, has anyone been in the sitting room at odd hours? Maybe someone you didn't expect?" Mary hesitated, her eyes darting to the door. "Well, Mr. Lionel was there late last night looking for a book," he said, "but he's always wandering about. I didn't think nothing of it." Miss Marple nodded, filing that away. Lionel, late at night, in the room where the frame vanished. Another thread to tug. She decided to seek out Lionel next, finding him in the study, poring over ledgers with a frown. His boots were clean today, but a blue scarf lay on the chair, its color matching the wool thread she'd found. "Good morning, Lionel," she said, her tone light. "You've been busy, I hear. Lots of village errands?" Lionel looked up, his face pale and his eyes tired. "Just helping out, Miss Marple. The village keeps me running." He forced a smile, but his hands fidgeted with a pen. Miss Marple tilted her head. "It's a lively place, St. Mary's Bay. Though all this talk of lights and missing things must be unsettling. Ever see anything odd on your walks?" Lionel's pen paused and he shrugged. "Nothing worth mentioning. Just village gossip, lights, smugglers, that sort. I don't pay it mind." He stood, grabbing his scarf. "I've got to head out, excuse me." Miss Marple watched him go, her mind sharp. Lionel's quick exit, his tired eyes, the scarf. It all added to the pattern. He was hiding something, perhaps tied to the cove or the thefts. By midday, Miss Marple took a walk in the garden, her eyes scanning for more clues. Near the east wing, she found a fresh scuff mark, smaller than the footprints, but deep as if someone had knelt there, and there, caught on a rose bush, was a tiny bead, green and shiny like the emerald necklace. She tucked it into her bag, her heart quickening. The necklace wasn't far, she was sure. It was still in play, part of whatever was happening at Black Rock. She returned to the manor for lunch, where the mood was heavy. Mr. Harrow grumbled about the soup. Clara ate in silence, and Captain Reed's story about a shipwreck felt flat, his eyes on the window. Lionel was absent again, and Beatrice whispered that he'd gone to the village. As always, Miss Marple noticed a smudge of tar on the tablecloth near where Captain Reed sat, and filed it away. After lunch, she decided to visit the village, hoping to catch Mrs. Gibbs or Mr. Carter. She found Mrs. Gibbs at the post office, sorting letters, with her usual sharp-eyed efficiency. "Miss Marple," she said, her nose twitching. "Heard about that silver frame. Another theft, eh?" "Yes," Miss Marple said, her smile warm. "And those lights on the cliffs. Any new talk?" Mrs. Gibbs leaned forward, her voice a whisper. "Saw one last night near Black Rock. And Jimmy Pike was out late again with Eddie. They were near the docks carrying a sack. Not fishing gear, I'll wager." Miss Marple nodded, her mind adding the sack to Jimmy, Eddie, and the tarp. "Thank you, Mrs. Gibbs. You're a treasure." She visited Mr. Carter's shop next, where the air was thick with fish and tar. He was repairing a net, his fingers quick. "Back again, miss?" he said, his face grim. "Heard about the frame. Troubles." piling up. It is, Miss Marple said, picking up a small brass weight as if to buy it. I was near Black Rock today. That boat you mentioned, any more sightings? Carter's eyes narrowed. Aye, last night. Small, no lights, hugging the cove. And I saw Eddie there, near the rocks, looking shifty. If there's smuggling, that cove's the spot. Miss Marple thanked him and left, her basket heavier with the weight and her mind heavier with clues. A boat with no lights, Eddie at the cove, Clara's sketch, the note. It was all pointing to Black Rock. Back at the manor, the afternoon passed with Miss Marple watching and listening. She saw Clara in the garden, sketching with a frown, her eyes on the cliffs. She noticed Mary drop a cup in the kitchen, her voice high when Beatrice asked what was wrong. She heard Captain Reed on the porch muttering about tides and timing, his pipe unlit, and she spotted Lionel returning, his scarf loose, a cut on his hand that he tried to hide. Dinner was tense, with Mr. Harrow snapping at Mary over a cold plate, Clara barely speaking, and Captain Reed's stories short and distracted. Beatrice whispered to Miss Marple that she'd found a strange mark on the sitting room window, a smudge like someone had pressed against it from outside. As night fell, Miss Marple sat by her window knitting, her eyes on the cliffs. The light appeared again near Black Rock, flickering like a code. She watched until it vanished, her mind weaving the threads, Clara's sketch, Jimmy and Eddie's sack, the bead, the note, the missing frame. The sketchbook was the key, she was sure, and she'd find a way to see more. She set her knitting down and smiled. The puzzle was growing and the cliffs were whispering secrets. Tomorrow she'd get closer to Clara, talk to Jimmy if she could, and keep an eye on Lionel. Miss Jane Marple was on the trail, and the truth was getting clearer. Chapter 7. Shadows at Black Rock. Miss Jane Marple sat by the window of her room at Seaside Manor, her knitting needles still as the dawn light cast a soft glow over the cliffs. The sea air was cool, slipping through the cracked window, but her mind was warm with the puzzle of St. Mary's Bay. The clues were mounting, footprints under Beatrice's window, lights flickering at Black Rock, the missing necklace, candlestick, silver frame, and pocket watch, whispers of smugglers, the blue cloth, cigarette butt, metal hook, blue wool thread, tar smudges, the note about a midnight meeting, the green, Bead and Clara's sketches of a cave and boat. Yesterday's discovery of Clara's sketch with its marked cave and midnight time had sharpened her focus. Today she resolved to get closer to Black Rock Cove itself. The cove was the heart of this mystery, and Miss Marple knew that secrets lingered where the sea met the cliffs. She dressed in her sturdy blue frock, pinned her hat, and tucked her knitting bag into her arm, its contents, button, cloth, cigarette, butt, glass shard, hook, thread, bead, and folded sketch, clinking softly. Breakfast was tense in the parlor, with Beatrice nibbling toast, her eyes shadowed with worry. Mr. Harrow was absent. Captain Reed ate quickly, and Clara Tate stared at her plate, her fingers twisting a napkin. Lionel appeared briefly, his scarf loose and his boots muddy again, and slipped out before Miss Marple could speak to him. "Beatrice, dear," Miss Marple said, sipping tea. "I'm taking a walk to the cliffs again, toward Black Rock. The sea's lovely this morning. Would you come along?" Beatrice shook her head, her curls trembling. "Oh, Jane, those cliffs scare me with all the talk of lights and caves. And now, another thing's gone. A brass key from the library desk. I saw it yesterday, and it's vanished." Her voice broke and she looked away. Miss Marple patted her hand. "Another theft? We'll sort it, dear. Keys don't walk off. They're taken, and thieves leave trails. I'll be careful." She set out on the cliff path, the same narrow trail she'd walked before, where grass met rock and the sea roared below. The gulls cried overhead, and the wind tugged at her shawl, but her eyes were sharp, scanning for clues. Near the lookout bench, where she'd found the tar smudge and scratch, she noticed a fresh mark, a scuff in the dirt, deep and uneven like someone had slipped. Beside it was a small, twisted piece of rope, frayed at one end as if cut hastily. She knelt, picked it up and tucked it into her bag, her mind noting its rough texture, like the fishing nets in Mr. Carter's shop. Further along, The path dipped toward Black Rock Cove, where the cliffs curved inward, hiding the shore from view. Miss Marple stayed well back from the edge, her steps careful. The cove was below, its rocks dark and slick, the water churning. She squinted, searching for the cave entrance Clara had sketched, but the tide was high, swallowing any openings. A faint smell caught her nose. Tar, sharp and fresh like the smudge on the bench in Lionel's boots. She followed it, her eyes catching a glint in the grass. A small brass clip, the kind used to secure a boat's rigging. She added it to her bag, her heart quickening. The cove was alive with secrets. As she stood there, a figure appeared on the path below, moving quickly toward the cove. It was Eddie, Tom's cousin, his cap low and a sack slung over his shoulder. Miss Marple stepped behind a boulder, her breath steady, and watched. Eddie glanced around, his sharp eyes scanning the cliffs, then ducked toward a narrow ledge leading to the cove. He paused, set the sack down, and pulled something from his pocket. A small folded paper. He tucked it into a crevice in the rock, then grabbed the sack and hurried back up the path, disappearing around the bend. When he was gone, Miss Marple approached the crevice, her fingers careful as she retrieved the paper. It was another sketch, like Clara's, showing the cove with a cave marked by a cross. But this one had words. Tonight 12, bring the goods. The handwriting was rough, not Clara's neat script. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Eddie was part of it, whatever it was, and Clara's sketches were messages, passed like notes, in a schoolroom. She tucked the paper into her bag and continued her walk, the path looping back toward the manor. Near the bench, she saw Jimmy Pike, his wiry frame slouched against a rock, his eyes on the sea. He jumped when he saw her, his cap slipping. "Morning, miss," he stammered. "Just looking at the waves." "Good morning, Jimmy," Miss Marple said, her smile warm. "It's a fine spot, though I hear it's busier at night with lights and such. Ever see anything odd?" Jimmy's face flushed, and he shoved his hands in his pockets. "Lights? Nah, just, boats maybe. I don't. Stay out late." He turned and bolted, his boots kicking up dirt. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind sharp. Jimmy and Eddie both nervous, both tied to the cove. She thought of Mrs. Gibbs's gossip about their heavy sack and tarp, and Mr. Carter's talk of a boat with no lights. The pieces were fitting, but the picture wasn't clear yet. Back at the manor, lunch was a quiet affair. Mr. Harrow grumbled about the fish, Clara picked at her food, and Captain Reed's story about a storm felt forced, his eyes flicking to the window. Lionel was absent, and Beatrice whispered that he'd gone to the village again. With that scarf of his. Miss Marple noticed a faint smell of tar in the dining room near Captain Reed's chair and filed it away. After lunch, she sought out Clara in the conservatory, hoping to glimpse her sketchbook. Clara was there, her pencil moving slowly, her face tense. She looked up as Miss Marple entered, her eyes wary. "Oh, Miss Marple, I didn't hear you." "Just enjoying the flowers, dear," Miss Marple said, settling nearby with her knitting. "Your sketches must be beautiful. Mind if I see one? I've always loved art." Clara's fingers tightened on her sketchbook and she shook her head. "They're not ready. Just rough drawings, you know." She stood, clutching the book, and hurried out, her steps quick. Miss Marple sighed, but her smile didn't fade. Clara was guarding that sketchbook like a treasure, and treasures were worth guarding for a reason. She decided to check the sitting room next, where the silver frame had vanished. The room was tidy, but she noticed a faint smudge on the windowsill, mud like the kind under Beatrice's window. And there, caught in the curtain, was a tiny sliver of glass, green and smooth, like the shard from the cliffs. She tucked it into her bag, her mind racing. The thefts were linked to the cliffs, she was sure. Later, she found Captain Reed on the porch, his pipe unlit, his eyes on the sea. "Afternoon, Captain," she said, her tone light. "I was at Black Rock today. Quite a spot. Ever hear of smugglers using that cove?" Reed's grin faltered, and he fumbled with his pipe. "Black Rock? Old tales, miss. Caves there, sure, but they're flooded now. Nobody goes there. He laughed, but it was thin, and he excused himself, heading inside. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind noting his unease. Captain Reed knew more about Black Rock than he let on, and his stories always circled back to the cliffs, like a gull over a fish. By afternoon, she took a walk to the village, hoping to catch Mr. Carter or Mrs. Gibbs. She found Mr. Carter at his shop mending a net, the air thick with tar. "Back again, miss?" he said, his eyes narrow. "Heard about that key. More trouble at the manor." "Yes," Miss Marple said, picking up a small brass hook as if to buy it. "And those lights at Black Rock? Any new sightings?" Carter nodded, his face grim. "Last night, flickering like a signal. And I saw Eddie near the cove carrying a sack. Not fishing, I'll bet. That boy's mixed up in something." Miss Marple thanked him and visited Mrs. Gibbs next, who was sorting letters at the post office. "Miss Marple," she said, her nose twitching. "Another theft, eh? That key's the talk of the village." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her smile warm. "And Jimmy Pike, any more talk about him and Eddie?" Mrs. Gibbs leaned forward, her voice low. "Saw him last night near the docks with a crate, heavy by the look of it. And Jimmy's got a new watch, fancy for a baker's boy, Miss..." Marple nodded, her mind adding the crate and watch to the puzzle. She left the village, her basket heavier with the hook and her mind heavier with clues. Eddie's sack, Jimmy's watch, Clara's sketch, the note, the boat. Back at the manor, the evening was tense. Dinner saw Mr. Harrow snap at Mary over a spilled glass, Clara barely speak, and Captain Reed's stories fall flat. Lionel returned late, his scarf missing, a fresh cut on his cheek. Beatrice whispered to Miss Marple that she'd found a strange mark on the library door, a scratch like someone had tried to force it. As night fell, Miss Marple sat by her window knitting, her eyes on Black Rock. The light appeared, flickering steadily, answered by another from the sea. She watched until they vanished, her mind weaving the threads. Eddie's note, Clara's sketches, Jimmy's watch, the missing key, the tar. Black Rock was calling, and she was ready to answer. She set her knitting down and smiled. The puzzle was growing, and the cove was the key. Tomorrow she'd get closer to Eddie, watch Lionel, and find a way to see Clara's sketches. Miss Jane Marple was on the trail, and the truth was near. Chapter 8. The Midnight Meeting. Miss Jane Marple sat in her room at Seaside Manor, her knitting needles resting in her lap as the clock on the mantel ticked toward 11. The room was dim, lit only by a single lamp, and the sea outside whispered secrets through the cracked window. Her mind was sharp, turning over the puzzle of St. Mary's Bay. Footprints under Beatrice's window, lights at Black Rock, the missing necklace, candlestick, silver frame, pocket watch and brass key, village talk of smugglers, the blue cloth, cigarette butt, metal hook, blue wool thread, tar smudges, notes about midnight meetings, Clara's sketches, green bead, brass clip, rope piece, and the knife with blue cloth. Yesterday's find, Eddie's note about tonight 12, bring the goods had set her heart racing. Tonight she decided she would watch the cove from a safe distance. A midnight meeting was no place for an old lady, but Miss Marple knew how to listen from the shadows. She wrapped her shawl tighter, tucked her knitting bag under her arm, its contents clinking softly, and slipped into a dark coat. Beatrice had been nervous at dinner, whispering that a guest's brooch had gone missing from Clara's room, the latest in the string of thefts. The manor's guests, Mr. Harrow, Clara, Captain Reed, and Lionel, had been quiet, their eyes avoiding each other. Miss Marple had noted Lionel's absence after dinner, his blue scarf missing from the hall rack, and Clara's quick glance at the window when the cliffs were mentioned. "Beatrice, dear," Miss Marple had said, clearing the teacups, "I might sit up a bit tonight. The sea's lovely under the moon. Don't worry if you hear me moving." Beatrice's eyes widened, but she nodded. "Oh, Jane, please be careful. With all these thefts and lights, I don't know what's happening." Miss Marple smiled, patting her arm. "Just a quiet night, dear. I'll be fine." She waited until the manor was still. the creak of floorboards fading as the guests retired. At 11:30, she slipped out the back door, her steps silent on the garden path. The night was cool, the air sharp with salt, and the cliffs loomed dark against a sliver of moon. She took the cliff path, staying well back from the edge, her eyes adjusting to the shadows. The cove at Black Rock was her goal, but she'd stop at the lookout bench where she'd found the tar smudge and rope piece, a safe spot to watch without being seen. The path was quiet, save for the waves below and the occasional hoot of an owl. Miss Marple moved slowly, her sensible shoes gripping the dirt. Near the bench she paused, her breath steady, and scanned the cove. The tide was low, revealing a narrow strip of rocky shore and the dark mouth of a cave, just as Clara's sketch had shown. No lights yet, but the night felt alive, heavy with secrets. She settled behind a boulder near the bench, her coat blending with the shadows, and pulled out her knitting, more for comfort than work. Her eyes stayed on the cove, her ears tuned to every sound. A faint rustle came from the path below, and she froze, her needles still. A figure emerged. Jimmy Pike, his cap low, a sack over his shoulder. He moved quickly, glancing around, and ducked toward the cove, disappearing into the cave's shadow. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she stayed put. Jimmy was part of it, just as Mrs. Gibbs had hinted with her talk of sacks and tarps. She waited, her eyes sharp, and soon another figure appeared. Eddie, Tom's cousin, his wiry frame unmistakable. He carried a crate, heavy by the way he staggered, and followed Jimmy's path to the cave. A low whistle sounded, answered by another from the sea, and Miss Marple squinted, catching the outline of a small boat, its hull low in the water. No lights. The boat nudged the shore, and a third figure stepped out, a man broad-shouldered, his face hidden by a hat. He moved to the cave, where Jimmy and Eddie waited, and their voices carried faintly, too low to make out words. Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes straining. The man handed something to Jimmy, a small bundle wrapped in cloth, and took the crate from Eddie. The boat rocked as he loaded it, then pushed off, vanishing into the dark. Jimmy and Eddie lingered, their heads close, whispering. Jimmy tucked the bundle into his sack, and they started up the path, passing close to Miss Marple's hiding spot. She held her breath, her knitting pressed to her chest, and caught a snatch of their talk. Next. "One's bigger," Eddie muttered. "Midnight. 2 days." Jimmy nodded, his voice tense. "Just keep it quiet. Too many eyes." They moved on, their steps fading, and Miss Marple let out a slow breath. A midnight meeting, goods exchanged, a boat with no lights. It was smuggling. She was sure, and the Manor's thefts were tied to it. The bundle Jimmy held, perhaps the necklace or the watch or even the brass key. She waited until the cove was silent, then slipped back to the Manor, her mind racing. Inside, she sat by her window, knitting to calm her nerves, and sorted the night's clues. Jimmy and Eddie, the boat, the broad-shouldered man, the bundle, the crate, the next meeting in 2 days. She thought of Clara's sketches marking the cave and Lionel's muddy boots, his scarf matching the blue wool thread. The cove was the hub, and the Manor was its shadow. The next morning, Miss Marple joined Beatrice for breakfast, where the air was heavy. Beatrice whispered that a guest's cufflink, Mr. Harrow's, had vanished overnight. "It's getting worse, Jane," she said, her hands shaking. "What's happening?" Miss Marple patted her hand. "We're close, dear. Thieves get careless. And I'm watching." After breakfast, she sought out Clara in the conservatory, hoping to catch her off guard. Clara was sketching, her pencil slow, her face pale. "Good morning, Clara," Miss Marple said, her smile warm. "I was at Black Rock last night. Quite a spot. Your sketches of it are so detailed, almost like maps." Clara's pencil snapped, and she stood, her sketchbook falling to the floor. A page slipped out, a drawing of the cove, with a boat and a crate marked 12ing. She scrambled to grab it, but Miss Marple's eyes were quicker. "Oh dear," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle. "That's a fine drawing, almost like you've been to the cove at night." Clara's face flushed, and she clutched the book. "It's just imagination. I don't know anything." She hurried out, leaving Miss Marple thoughtful. Next, she found Lionel in the garden, trimming a hedge with old Ben. His scarf was back, but a fresh cut on his hand caught her eye. "Morning, Lionel," she said, her tone light. "You've been busy in the village? Ever walk by Black Rock? It's quite a sight at night." Lionel's shears paused, and he shrugged. "Not really. Too dark for me." His voice was tight, and he turned back to the hedge, his hands unsteady. Miss Marple nodded, filing away his cut, his scarf, his nerves. She visited the village later, stopping at Mr. Carter's shop. The air smelled of tar, and Carter was mending a net. "Heard about that cufflink," he said, his face grim. "And I saw that boat again last night near Black Rock. No lights, just shadows." Miss Marple nodded, picking up a small brass ring. "And Jimmy or Eddie, any sign of them?" Carter's eyes narrowed. "Both were there carrying crates, and a bigger man, not from here, smuggling, I'd bet." She thanked him and visited Mrs. Gibbs, who was sorting letters. "Miss Marple," she said, her nose twitching. "Another theft? And I saw Jimmy last night, with a new coat. Too fine for a baker's boy." Miss Marple nodded, her mind adding, "The coat to the puzzle." Back at the manor, dinner was tense, with Mr. Harrow snapping at Mary, Clara silent, and Captain Reed's stories flat. Beatrice whispered about a strange noise last night, a thud, like a door. Miss Marple squeezed her hand, promising answers. As night fell, she sat by her window knitting, watching the cliffs. No light tonight, but the cove was calling. The midnight meeting had shown her the game: smuggling, thefts, secrets. Tomorrow, she'd press Clara, follow Lionel, and watch Jimmy. Miss Jane Marple was closing in, and the truth was near. Chapter 9. Unraveling the Threads. Miss Jane Marple sat in the parlor of Seaside Manor, her knitting needles clicking softly as the morning sun spilled through the tall windows. The room smelled of polished wood and fresh tea, but her mind was deep in the puzzle of St. Mary's Bay. The clues were a tangled web: footprints under Beatrice's window, lights at Black Rock Cove, the missing necklace, candlestick, silver frame, pocket watch, brass key, brooch, and cufflink, village talk, of smugglers, the blue cloth, cigarette butt, metal hook, blue wool thread, tar smudges, notes about midnight meetings, Clara's sketches, green bead, brass clip, rope piece, knife, matchbox, and the map fragment found in Lionel's room. Last night's glimpse of the midnight meeting, Jimmy Pike, Eddie, and the broad-shouldered stranger exchanging goods, had sharpened her focus. Today, she decided, she would tug at the threads, starting with Lionel and Clara, to see what unraveled. The truth was close, and Miss Marple knew how to pull it loose. Beatrice joined her for breakfast, her face pale and her hands fidgeting with a napkin. The table was set with porridge, toast, and tea, but Beatrice barely touched her food. "Jane?" "It's getting worse," she whispered. "A guest scarf, Clara's, went missing from the hall last night. I don't know what to do." Miss Marple set her teacup down, her eyes gentle but sharp. "Another theft, dear? That's troubling. Do you know when the scarf was last seen?" "Yesterday evening," Beatrice said, her voice trembling. "Clara left it on the rack after dinner. Mary swears she didn't touch it, but... Oh, Jane, I'm so tired of this." Miss Marple patted her hand. "We're nearly there, dear. Every missing thing is a clue, and I'm putting them together. Don't lose heart." After breakfast, Miss Marple decided to start with Lionel. She found him in the study, hunched over, a ledger, his blue scarf, the one matching the wool thread, draped over a chair. His face was drawn, with dark circles under his eyes and a fresh bandage on his hand where she'd seen the cut. "Good morning, Lionel," Miss Marple said, her tone light, settling into a chair with her knitting. "You've been so busy with village errands. Ever visit Black Rock Cove? I hear it's a favorite spot at night." Lionel's pen froze and his eyes flicked to the window. "Black Rock? No, I stick to the village. Too rocky out there." His voice was tight, and his fingers tapped the ledger. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. "Of course, dear. Though with all this talk of lights and missing things, it makes one curious. That scarf of yours, it's lovely. Clara had one like it, didn't she?" Such a shame it's gone. Lionel's face flushed, and he stood grabbing his scarf. I wouldn't know. I've got work to do, Miss Marple. Excuse me. He hurried out, leaving the ledger open. Miss Marple glanced at the ledger, her eyes catching a scribbled note in the margin. BR 12, 50 quid. Her lips pursed. BlackRock, midnight, money. Lionel was deeper in this than she'd thought. She tucked the detail away, next to the map fragment she'd found in his room, marked with the cove. Next, she sought out Clara in the conservatory, where the young artist was sketching, her pencil slow and her face tense. Clara looked up as Miss Marple entered, her eyes wary, and clutched her sketchbook. Oh, Miss Marple, I'm just working. Such a lovely spot, dear, Miss Marple said, sitting nearby with her knitting. I found a sketch near BlackRock yesterday, quite detailed, with a cave and a boat. Yours, perhaps? Clara's pencil snapped and her hands shook. I don't know what you mean. I draw the cliffs, not caves. She stood, her sketchbook slipping, and a page fell out, a drawing of the cove with a crate and a figure marked 12th hour. Miss Marple bent to pick it up, her smile gentle. Oh dear, what a fine drawing, almost like you've seen the cove at midnight. It's all right, Clara, I'm only trying to help. Clara's eyes filled with tears and she grabbed the sketch, her voice low. I didn't mean to. I just draw what I see. Please don't tell anyone. She fled, leaving Miss Marple thoughtful. Clara was scared, not guilty, Miss Marple decided. Her sketches were messages, perhaps unwillingly, for someone at the cove. Eddie, Jimmy, or the stranger. She needed to know more, but gently, or Clara would shut her out. By midday, Miss Marple took a walk in the garden, her eyes scanning for clues. Near the east wing, she found a fresh footprint, smaller than the others with a faint trace of tar. And there, caught on a thorn, was a sliver of green ribbon, like the kind on Beatrice's necklace. She tucked it into her bag, next to the bead. Cloth, cigarette butt, hook, thread, glass, clip, rope, knife, matchbox, and sketches. The necklace was still in play, she was sure, hidden somewhere close. She returned to the manor for lunch, where the mood was heavy. Mr. Harrow grumbled about the soup. Captain Reed's story about a shipwreck was short, and Clara ate in silence, her eyes red. Lionel appeared briefly, his scarf missing, and left early, muttering about the village. Beatrice whispered that a guest's ring, Captain Reed's, had vanished from his room. Another theft? Miss Marple said softly, her eyes scanning the table. We're close, dear. Thieves leave tracks. After lunch, she visited Captain Reed on the porch, where he was puffing his pipe, his eyes on the sea. Afternoon, Captain, she said, her tone light. I was at BlackRock again. That cove's quite a spot. Ever hear of goods moving through there at midnight? Reed's pipe paused, and his grin faded. Goods? Just old tales, miss. Caves are flooded now. Nobody uses them. His hands fidgeted, and he knocked ash from his pipe, scattering it. Miss Marple nodded, noting the ash, similar to the matchbox near the cove. Of course, though, with all these missing things, it makes one wonder. That ring of yours, such a shame. Reed shrugged, his laugh forced. Cheap thing, not worth stealing. Probably rolled under the bed. He excused himself, his steps quick. Miss Marple's mind buzzed. Reed's unease, his ash, his talk of caves, it all pointed to BlackRock. She decided to visit the village, seeking Mr. Carter and Mrs. Gibbs. At the fishing shop, Carter was mending a net, the air thick with tar. Heard about that ring, he said, his face grim. And I saw that boat last night near BlackRock. Jimmy and Eddie were there with a big man. Miss Marple nodded, picking up a small brass weight. And the lights, still flickering? Aye, Carter said, his eyes narrow. Like signals. If it's smuggling, that cove's the heart of it. She thanked him and stopped at the post office, where Mrs. Gibbs was sorting letters. Miss Marple, she said, her nose twitching. Another theft? And I saw Eddie last night with a new knife. Fancy, with a blue handle. Miss Marple's heart skipped. Blue, like the knife near the cove. Thank you, Mrs. Gibbs. You're a gem. Back at the manor, the afternoon passed with Miss Marple watching and listening. She saw Clara sketching in the garden, her pencil shaky, her eyes on the cliffs. She noticed Mary drop a tray, her voice high when Beatrice asked what was wrong. She heard Lionel arguing with Mr. Harrow in the study, their voices low but heated, something about debts, and she found a dropped button in the hall, brass and scratched, like the clip from Black Rock. Dinner was tense, with Mr. Harrow snapping at Mary, Clara barely speaking, and Captain Reed's stories flat. Beatrice whispered about a strange noise. Last night, a scrape like a window opening. Miss Marple squeezed her hand, promising answers. As night fell, Miss Marple sat by her window, knitting, watching the cliffs. No light tonight, but the cove was alive in her mind. Jimmy, Eddie, the stranger, the boat, the crate. The thefts were feeding something bigger, she was sure, and the threads were starting to weave together. She set her knitting down and smiled. The puzzle was clear now: smuggling at Black Rock, thefts to fund or hide it, Clara's sketches as signals, Lionel's debts, Eddie and Jimmy as runners. Tomorrow, she'd confront Clara gently, press Lionel, and watch the cove. Miss Jane Marple was unraveling the truth, and it was almost in her grasp. Chapter 10. The Smuggler's Cave Miss. Jane Marple sat in the conservatory of Seaside Manor, her knitting needles clicking softly as the morning sun warmed the glass walls. The air smelled of damp earth and blooming jasmine, but her mind was on the puzzle of St. Mary's Bay. The clues were a knotted tangle. Footprints under Beatrice's window, lights at Black Rock Cove, the missing necklace, candlestick, silver frame, pocket watch, brass key, brooch, cufflink, scarf, and ring, village, gossip about smugglers, the blue cloth, cigarette butt, metal hook, blue wool thread, tar smudges, notes about midnight meetings, Clara's sketches, green bead, brass clip, rope piece, knife, matchbox, map fragment, green ribbon, coin, and the torn letter hinting at payment. Yesterday's discoveries, Clara's tearful admission, Lionel's nervous ledger note, and the foreign coin near the cove, had pointed her straight to Black Rock. Today, she decided, she would find a way to see inside the smuggler's cave itself. The cave was the heart of this mystery, and Miss Marple was ready to tug its secrets loose. Beatrice joined her for breakfast in the parlor, her hands shaking as she poured tea. The table held toast, jam, and a bowl of fruit, but Beatrice only nibbled a crust, her eyes red. "Jane, it's unbearable," she whispered. "Another thing's gone, a small vase from the hall table. I saw it yesterday and now it's vanished." Miss Marple set her teacup down, her eyes gentle but sharp. "Another theft, dear? We're close now. Every missing piece is a clue, and I'm stitching them together. Don't lose hope." "Close?" Beatrice's voice trembled. "Oh, Jane, I trust you, but I'm so afraid. What if it's someone in the house?" Miss Marple patted her hand. "We'll sort it, dear. Thieves always slip up, and I'm watching." After breakfast, Miss Marple decided to start with Clara, hoping to coax more about her sketches. She found the young artist in the garden, sitting on a bench with her sketchbook closed, her face pale and her eyes distant. "Good morning, Clara," Miss Marple said, settling beside her with her knitting. "You look troubled, dear. Those sketches of yours, they're important, aren't they? Especially the ones of Black Rock Cove." Clara's hands tightened on her sketchbook and her voice was barely a whisper. I didn't want to, Miss Marple. They made me draw them. I saw things. Boats, crates, and they said to mark the spots. I'm scared." Miss Marple's needles paused, her smile soft. "Who's they, dear? You can tell me. I only want to help." Clara's eyes filled with tears and she shook her head. "I can't say. They'll know, but the cave at Black Rock, that's where it happens. Please don't tell anyone." She stood, clutching her sketchbook, and hurried back to the manor. Miss Marple watched her go, her mind sharp. Clara was a pawn, not a player, forced to sketch signals for the smugglers. The cave was the key, and Clara's fear pointed to someone, powerful, perhaps the broad-shouldered man from the midnight meeting. Next, she sought out Lionel, finding him in the study, his ledger closed and his blue scarf draped over a chair. His face was haggard, a fresh bruise on his cheek. "Morning, Lionel," Miss Marple said, her tone light. "I was thinking of Black Rock Cove. Ever been there at night? I hear it's quite a spot." Lionel's eyes flicked to the door and his hands fidgeted. "Black Rock? No, I don't go there. Too dangerous." His voice was tight and he grabbed his scarf. "I've got errands. Excuse me." Miss Marple noted his bruise, his nerves, the scarf matching the blue wool thread. Lionel was in deep debts, perhaps, as Mr. Harrow's argument had hinted, tying him to the cove. She glanced at the ledger as he left, spotting another note. BR 12, 100 quid. The stakes were rising. By mid-morning, Miss Marple took a walk to the cliff path aiming for Black Rock. The air was sharp with salt and the gulls cried overhead. She stayed on the safe path, her eyes scanning the ground. Near the lookout bench, she found a fresh clue, a small tarnished key, not the manor's brass key but older, perhaps for a lock in the cave. She tucked it into her bag, next to the ribbon, bead, cloth, cigarette butt, hook, thread, glass, clip, rope, knife, matchbox, coin, and sketches. The cove was below, its rocks dark, and the cave's mouth visible with the tide low. She didn't dare climb down. Her knees weren't up to it, but she squinted, catching a glint inside the cave like metal or glass. A faint smell of tar lingered, and she spotted a scuff mark on the path, deep and fresh, with a trace of blue cloth caught on a rock. She added it to her bag, her heart quickening. The cave was active, and the smugglers weren't as careful as they thought. As she turned to leave, she saw Jimmy Pike on the path, his cap low and a sack over his shoulder. He froze when he saw her, his sharp eyes narrowing. "Morning, miss," he muttered. "Just checking the rocks." "Good morning, Jimmy," Miss Marple said, her smile warm. "Black Rock's busy, I hear. Boats at midnight, crates moving. Ever see anything like that?" Jimmy's face flushed and he backed away. "Boats? Nah, just fishing. I gotta go." He bolted, his sack bouncing. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind filing his panic next to Eddie's crate and the stranger's bundle. Jimmy was a runner, not a leader, but he knew the cave's secrets. Back at the manor, lunch was tense. Mr. Harrow grumbled about the bread, Clara ate in silence, and Captain Reed's story about a storm was short, his eyes on the window. Lionel was absent, and Beatrice whispered that he'd gone to the village, with that bruise on his face. Miss Marple noticed a faint oil stain on the tablecloth near Captain Reed's seat and filed it away. After lunch, she visited Captain Reed on the porch, his pipe unlit, his eyes on the sea. "Afternoon, Captain," she said, her tone light. "I was at Black Rock today. That cave's intriguing. Ever hear of smugglers using it?" Reed's pipe shook, and his grin was forced. "Caves? Old tales, miss, flooded now mostly, nobody goes there." He knocked ash from his pipe, scattering it, and excused himself. Miss Marple noted the ash like the matchbox and his unease. Reed was involved, perhaps guiding the boat or signaling from the cliffs. She decided to check the manor's cellar, where she'd smelled brandy before. The stairs creaked and the air was damp, but she found a crate in a corner, its lid loose. Inside were bottles, brandy, unmarked, and a small velvet pouch. She opened it, her breath catching. The emerald necklace, its green stones glinting. She left it there, knowing it was safer hidden for now, but her mind raced. The thefts were feeding the smuggling, and the cellar was a stash. In the village, she stopped at Mr. Carter's shop where the air was thick with tar. "Heard about that vase," he said, mending a net. "And I saw that boat last night near Black Rock. Jimmy and Eddie were there with a big man." Miss Marple nodded, picking up a small brass hook. "And the cave? Any talk of what's inside?" Carter's eyes narrowed. "Crates, I'd bet. Smugglers always use that cave. If you're looking, be careful." She thanked him and visited Mrs. Gibbs at the post office. "Miss Marple," she said, her nose twitching. "Another theft? And I saw Eddie last night with a new ring, too. Shiny for a dock boy." Miss Marple's heart skipped. Captain Reed's ring, perhaps. Thank you, Mrs. Gibbs. You're a star. Back at the manor, the afternoon passed with Miss Marple watching. She saw Clara sketching, her hands shaky, her eyes on the cliffs. She noticed Mary drop a cup, her voice high when Beatrice asked why. She heard Lionel arguing with Mr. Harrow in the garden, something about payment due, and she found a dropped match near the cellar door, smelling of tar. Dinner was quiet, with Mr. Harrow snapping at Mary, Clara barely speaking, and Captain Reed's stories flat. Beatrice whispered about a strange noise, a thud in the cellar. Miss Marple squeezed her hand, promising answers. As night fell, Miss Marple sat by her window, knitting, watching the cliffs. A light flickered at Black Rock, answered by the sea. She watched until it vanished, her mind weaving the threads. Necklace. In the cellar, Clara's sketches, Lionel's debts, Jimmy and Eddie's crates, Reed's signals. The cave was the key, and she was ready to unlock it. She set her knitting down and smiled. The puzzle was clear: smuggling at Black Rock, thefts to fund it, Clara's sketches as signals, Lionel's debts, Eddie and Jimmy as runners, Reed as hiding. Tomorrow, she'd confront Clara, press Lionel, and alert the authorities. Miss Jane Marple was unraveling the truth, and it was in her grasp. Chapter 11. The Net. Titan's Miss Jane Marple sat in the parlor of Seaside Manor, her knitting needles clicking softly as the morning light filtered through the lace curtains. The room smelled of fresh tea and polished wood, but her mind was deep in the puzzle of St. Mary's Bay. The clues were a knotted web: footprints under Beatrice's window, lights at Black Rock Cove, the missing necklace, candlestick, silver frame, pocket watch, brass key, brooch, cufflink, scarf, ring, and vase, village talk of smugglers, the blue cloth, cigarette butt, metal hook, blue wool thread, tar smudges, notes about midnight meetings, Clara's sketches, green bead, brass clip, rope piece, knife, matchbox, map fragment, green ribbon, coin, torn letter, tarnished key, and the ledger page listing BR deliveries. Yesterday's discovery of the emerald necklace in the cellar, hidden with smuggled brandy, had confirmed her suspicions. The manor's thefts were fueling a smuggling ring at Black Rock. Today, she decided, she would tighten the net, pressing Clara, Lionel, and Captain Reed to unravel the truth. The smugglers were getting careless, and Miss Marple was ready to catch them. Beatrice joined her for breakfast, her hands trembling as she set out toast and tea. Her face was pale, her eyes darting to the door. "Jane, it's happened again," she whispered. "A guest locket. Mary's, the maid's, went missing from her room last night. I can't bear it." Miss Marple set her teacup down, her eyes gentle but sharp. "Another theft, dear? We're nearly there. Every stolen item is a thread, and I'm pulling them together. Don't lose faith." Beatrice twisted her napkin. "Nearly there? Oh, Jane, I trust you, but I'm so scared. What if it's someone close?" Miss Marple patted her hand. "We'll sort it, dear. Thieves always leave traces, and I'm following them." After breakfast, Miss Marple sought out Clara in the conservatory, where the young artist was sketching, her pencil shaky, and her face tense. Clara looked up as Miss Marple entered, her eyes wary, clutching her sketchbook. "Good morning, Clara," Miss Marple said, settling nearby with her knitting. "You're frightened, dear, and I understand. Those sketches of Black Rock, they're signals for the smugglers, aren't they? Who's making you draw them?" Clara's pencil dropped and her voice broke. I didn't want to, Miss Marple. They said they'd hurt someone if I didn't. I just draw what they tell me, boats, crates, the cave. I don't know who they are, I swear." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she buried her face in her hands. Miss Marple's needles paused, her smile soft. "It's all right, dear, you're not to blame. Can you tell me anything about them? A voice, a name, anything?" Clara shook her head, her voice a whisper. "Just a man, big, with a rough voice. He comes to the cove at midnight. I leave the sketches under rocks, like they say. Please don't tell anyone." Miss Marple nodded. her mind filing Clara's words next to the broad-shouldered stranger from the midnight meeting. Clara was a victim, forced to help the smugglers. The big man was the key, and she needed to know who he was. Next, she found Lionel in the garden, raking leaves with old Ben. His blue scarf was gone, but a fresh bruise marked his jaw, and his eyes were tired. "Morning, Lionel," Miss Marple said, her tone light. "You've had a rough time, haven't you? Those errands in the village, do they take you to Black Rock Cove? I found a ledger note about deliveries there." Lionel's rake stopped and his face paled. "Black Rock? I don't know what you mean. I just run errands, that's all." His voice was tight and his hands shook as he gripped the rake. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. "Of course, dear, but debts can weigh heavy, can't they? Like the ones Mr. Harrow mentioned. If you're in trouble, I can help." Lionel's eyes flicked to the manor and he swallowed hard. "I'm fine, Miss Marple. I've got to finish this." He turned back to the leaves, his movements jerky. Miss Marple watched him, her mind sharp. Lionel's bruises, his ledger notes, the map fragment. He was tied to the smuggling, likely paying off debts with stolen goods. She needed to press him gently, or he'd bolt. By mid-morning, Miss Marple took a walk to the cliff path, her eyes scanning for clues. Near Black Rock Cove, she found a fresh scuff mark, deep and uneven with a trace of tar. And there, caught on a jagged rock, was a small brass pin, like the clip from the cove. She tucked it into her bag next to the key: ribbon, bead, cloth, cigarette butt, hook, thread, glass, clip, rope, knife, matchbox, coin, and sketches. The smugglers were active and their carelessness was her gain. Back at the manor, she decided to check the cellar again, where she'd found the necklace. The air was damp, and the crate was still there, its lid tighter now. She didn't touch it but noticed a fresh clue. A scrap of paper wedged under the crate with BR12 200 quid in the same rough handwriting as Eddie's note. She slipped it into her bag, her heart quickening. The smuggling was growing bolder and the manor was its base. At lunch, the mood was heavy. Mr. Harrow grumbled about the fish, Clara ate in silence, and Captain Reed's story about a whale was short, his eyes on the window. Lionel appeared briefly, his face bruised, and left early, muttering about the village. Beatrice whispered that she'd found a strange mark on the cellar door, a scratch, like someone had forced it. "Another clue," Miss Marple said softly, her eyes scanning the table. "We're close, dear." After lunch, she sought out Captain Reed on the porch, his pipe unlit, his eyes on the sea. "Afternoon, Captain," she said, her tone light. "I was at Black Rock again. That cave's busy, isn't it? Boats at midnight. Crates moving. You must know those waters well." Reed's pipe shook and his grin was forced. "Black Rock? Just rocks and water, miss. No boats I know of." His hands fidgeted, scattering ash, and he stood. "Gotta check the tides. Excuse me." Miss Marple noted the ash like the matchbox and his unease. Reed was guiding the boats, she was sure, signaling from the cliffs. She decided to visit the village, seeking Mr. Carter and Mrs. Gibbs. At the fishing shop, Carter was mending a net, the air thick with tar. "Heard about that locket," he said, his face grim. "And I saw that boat last night near Black Rock. Jimmy and Eddie were there with a big man." Miss Marple nodded, picking up a small brass ring. "And the cave? Any talk of what's inside?" Carter's eyes narrowed. "Crates, bottles, maybe jewels. Smugglers always use that cave. Watch your step, miss." She thanked him and stopped at the post office, where Mrs. Gibbs was sorting letters. "Miss Marple," she said, her nose twitching. "Another theft? And I saw Jimmy last night with a new bracelet, too fancy for a baker's boy." Miss Marple's heart skipped. Mary's locket, perhaps. "Thank you, Mrs. Gibbs, you're a treasure." Back at the manor, the afternoon passed with Miss Marple watching. She saw Clara sketching in the garden, her hands shaky, her eyes on the cliffs. She noticed Mary drop a plate, her voice high when Beatrice asked why. She heard Lionel arguing with Mr. Harrow in the study, something about final payment, and she found a dropped matchstick in the hall, smelling of tar. Dinner was tense, with Mr. Harrow snapping at Mary, Clara barely speaking and Captain Reed's stories flat. Beatrice whispered about a strange noise, a creak in the cellar. Miss Marple squeezed her hand, promising answers. As night fell, Miss Marple sat by her window, knitting, watching the cliffs. A light flickered at Black Rock, answered by the sea. She watched until it vanished, her mind weaving the threads. Necklace. In the cellar, Clara's sketches, Lionel's debts, Jimmy and Eddie's crates, Reed's signals, the big man. The net was tightening and she was ready to pull it closed. She set her knitting down and smiled. The puzzle was clear. Smuggling at Black Rock, thefts to fund it, Clara's sketches as signals, Lionel's debts, Eddie and Jimmy as runners, Reed as guide, the big man as leader. Tomorrow she'd alert the authorities, confront Clara and Lionel, and watch the cove. Miss Jane Marple was closing in, and the truth was hers. Chapter 12. The trap is sprung. Miss Jane Marple sat in the sitting room of Seaside Manor, her knitting needles clicking softly as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished floor. The room smelled of lemon polish and the faint salt of the sea, but her mind was sharp, weaving the puzzle of St. Mary's Bay. The clues were a tight knot. Footprints under Beatrice's window, lights at Black Rock Cove, the missing necklace, candlestick, silver frame, pocket watch, brass key, brooch, cufflink, scarf, ring, vase, and locket, village gossip about smugglers, the blue cloth, cigarette butt, metal hook, blue wool thread, tar smudges, notes about midnight meetings, Clara's sketches, green bead, brass clip, rope piece, knife, matchbox, map fragment, green ribbon, coin, torn letter, tarnished key, ledger page, and the lockbox in the cellar. Yesterday's findings, Clara's tearful confession, Lionel's coded ledger, and the lockbox matching the tarnished key, had brought her close to the truth. The smuggling ring at Black Rock was clear, and tonight, Miss Marple planned to set a trap to catch them red-handed. The net was tight, and she was ready to pull it closed. Beatrice joined her for tea, her hands trembling as she set out cups and a plate of biscuits. Her face was pale, her eyes red from worry. "Jane, it's happened again," she whispered. "A guest's pen, Mr. Harrow's, a silver one, went missing from the study last night. I can't take much more." Miss Marple set her knitting down, her eyes gentle but sharp. "Another theft, dear? We're at the end now. Every stolen item is a clue, and I've got them all in hand. Tonight we'll finish this." Beatrice's eyes widened. "Tonight? Oh, Jane, what are you planning? It's dangerous with all those lights and smugglers." Miss Marple patted her hand. "Don't fret, dear. I've sent word to Constable Evans in the village. He'll be ready. We just need to catch them in the act." After tea, Miss Marple slipped into the village to meet Constable Evans, a sturdy man with a no-nonsense face. She found him at the small police station polishing his boots. "Miss Marple," he said, standing, "your note said trouble at Black Rock. Smugglers, you think?" "Yes, Constable," she said, her voice calm. "They're using the cave at midnight, moving goods, brandy, jewels, maybe more. I've seen them, Jimmy Pike, Eddie, a big man, and others from the manor. Tonight they'll meet again. Can you have men ready?" Evans nodded, his jaw set. "I'll have 3 lads at the cove by 11. We'll hide and wait. You sure about this, miss?" Miss Marple smiled, her eyes sharp. "Quite sure, Constable. Thieves and smugglers always slip up, and I've watched their steps." Back at the manor, Miss Marple kept her eyes open. She found Clara in the conservatory, her sketchbook closed, her face pale. "Clara, dear," Miss Marple said, sitting nearby with her knitting, "you've been brave, but tonight's important. If you know when they'll meet at Black Rock, tell me. It'll help stop them." Clara's hands shook and her voice was, I heard them say midnight like always. The big man wants a big load tonight. Crates, heavy ones. But Miss Marple, they're dangerous. Be careful." Miss Marple nodded, her smile soft. "Thank you, dear. You've done right. Stay safe tonight." Next, she sought out Lionel, finding him in the garden, his face bruised and his hands fidgety. His blue scarf was missing, but a smudge of tar marked his sleeve. "Lionel," she said, her tone light. "Black Rock's busy tonight, I hear. Midnight meetings, goods moving. If you're caught in something, Now's the time to speak. Lionel's eyes darted to the cliffs and his voice was hoarse. I don't know anything, Miss Marple. Just stay away from the cove. It's not safe. He turned and hurried off, his steps uneven. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind sharp. Lionel was scared, tied to the smuggling by debts as his ledger and Mr. Harrow's arguments showed. She needed to watch him tonight. At dinner, the mood was tense. Mr. Harrow snapped at Mary over a cold soup, Clara barely spoke, and Captain Reed's story about a storm was flat, his eyes on the window. Lionel ate quickly and left, muttering about the village. Beatrice whispered that she'd found a strange mark on the study window, a smudge, like someone had climbed through. Another clue, Miss Marple said softly, squeezing Beatrice's hand. We're ready, dear. After dinner, Miss Marple prepared for the night. She tucked her knitting bag under her arm, its contents clinking softly, and slipped into a dark shawl. At 10, she met Constable Evans and his men near the cliff path, their lanterns dim. We'll hide near the cove, Evans whispered. You stay back, miss. It could get rough. Miss Marple nodded, her smile calm. I'll watch from the bench, Constable. Just be ready at midnight. She settled behind the lookout bench, her shawl blending with the shadows, her eyes on Black Rock Cove. The tide was low, the cave's mouth dark and open. At 11:30, figures appeared, Jimmy Pike, Eddie, and Lionel, each carrying a crate. They moved to the cave, their whispers carrying faintly. A low whistle sounded, answered by the sea, and a boat slid into the cove, its hull low and lightless. A broad-shouldered man stepped from the boat, his hat low, his voice rough. Hurry up, he growled. Big load tonight. Where's the rest? Miss Marple's heart quickened. The big man, Clara's fear, the leader. She squinted, catching a glint on his hand. A ring, like Captain Reed's. Her mind raced. Reed was involved, but was he the leader? Another figure emerged from the shadows. Captain Reed, his pipe unlit, his grin gone. It's here, he said, pointing to the crates. Jewels, brandy, all accounted for. The big man nodded and they began loading the boat. Miss Marple signaled Evans, a soft tap on the bench, and his men crept forward, their boots silent. The smugglers were busy, their backs to the path, and Evans sprang the trap. Stop where you are, he shouted, his lantern flaring. You're under arrest. Jimmy dropped his crate. Eddie bolted and Lionel froze, his face pale. The big man swung at Evans, but the constable's men tackled him, pinning him to the rocks. Captain Reed tried to slip to the boat, but Evans grabbed him, his cuffs snapping shut. Miss Marple stayed back, her eyes sharp, watching the chaos. The crates spilled open, bottles of brandy, a silver candlestick, Beatrice's necklace, and a velvet pouch with the missing locket. The trap had worked and the smugglers were caught. Back at the manor, Miss Marple sat with Beatrice, explaining as the constable hauled the men away. It was a smuggling ring, dear, she said, her voice calm. Captain Reed guided the boats. Lionel stole to pay debts, Jimmy and Eddie ran goods, and the big man, Tom Harrow, Mr. Harrow's brother, led them. Clara drew signals, but she was forced. The thefts funded their trade. Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Jane, you've saved us, but how did you know? Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking. People are the same everywhere, dear. They leave clues, like threads in a quilt. You just have to stitch them right. Chapter 13. The Final Stitch Miss. Jane Marple sat in the parlor of Seaside Manor, her knitting needles clicking softly as the morning sun poured through the lace curtains. The room was warm, smelling of fresh tea and polished wood, and for the first time in weeks the air felt lighter. The puzzle of St. Mary's Bay was nearly solved. Footprints under Beatrice's window, lights at Black Rock Cove, the missing necklace, candlestick, silver frame, pocket watch, brass key, brooch, cufflink, scarf, ring, vase, locket, and silver pin. Village gossip about smugglers, the blue cloth, cigarette butt, metal hook, blue wool thread, tar smudges, cryptic notes, Clara's sketches, green bead, brass clip, rope piece, knife, matchbox, map fragment, green ribbon, coin, torn letter, tarnished key, ledger page, lockbox, and coded letter had all pointed to a smuggling ring. Last night's trap at the Cove had caught Captain Reed, Lionel, Jimmy Pike, Eddie, and Tom Harrow, Mr. Harrow's brother, red-handed with stolen goods and smuggled brandy. Today, Miss Marple would tie up the loose ends, ensuring every thread of the mystery was neatly stitched. The manor was safe again, but her work wasn't quite done. Beatrice joined her for breakfast, her face still pale but her eyes brighter. She set out toast, jam, and a pot of tea, her hands steadier than they'd been. "Jane, I can't believe it's over," she said, her voice soft. "The constable brought back my necklace this morning and the candlestick, too. You've saved us," Miss Marple smiled, sipping her tea. "Not quite over, dear. The smugglers are caught, but we need to understand why and how. Then we can rest easy." Beatrice nodded, her fingers twisting her napkin. "But no more thefts, right? I found everything in place this morning, even Clara's scarf." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "That's a good sign, dear. Let's keep our eyes open a bit longer." After breakfast, Miss Marple visited Constable Evans at the village police station, where the air smelled of ink and old wood. Evans was sorting papers, his face tired but satisfied. "Miss Marple," he said, standing, "you were right about Blackrock. We've got Reed, Lionel, Jimmy, Eddie, and Tom Harrow locked up. Found crates of brandy, your friend's necklace, and half the stolen goods in the cave." Miss Marple nodded, her knitting bag resting on her lap. "Well done, Constable. Have they said anything about why they did it or who else might be involved?" Evans rubbed his chin. "Tom Harrow's the ringleader, no doubt. He's a tough one. Used to run goods up the coast. Reed guided the boats, using his sea knowledge. Lionel was in debt to Tom, stealing to pay it off. Jimmy and Eddie were runners, young and desperate for cash. Clara, she's not charged. Says she was forced to draw those sketches." Miss Marple's lips pursed. "Poor Clara. And Mr. Harrow. Any tie to his brother?" Evans shook his head. "Claims he didn't know, but he's shaken. Says Tom's been trouble for years. We're checking his story." Miss Marple thanked him and returned to the manor, her mind sorting the threads. Clara's sketches, Lionel's debts, Reed's signals, Jimmy and Eddie's crates, Tom's leadership. It was clear, but she needed to confirm the details and ensure no one else was involved. Back at the manor, she found Clara in the conservatory, her sketchbook open to a drawing of the cliffs, her face calm for the first time. "Clara, dear," Miss Marple said, sitting nearby with her knitting. "You've been through so much. Can you tell me how it started? Who first asked for those sketches?" Clara's pencil paused, and her voice was soft. "It was Tom Harrow, miss. He came to the manor one night, said he'd hurt someone if I didn't help. I drew what he wanted, boats, caves, times. I didn't know it was smuggling at first, just signals. I'm so sorry." Miss Marple's smile was gentle. "You did what you had to, dear. You're safe now. Did anyone else know? Mr. Harrow, perhaps?" Clara shook her head. "Not that I saw. Mr. Harrow was always angry, but I don't think he knew about Tom. Lionel, he was scared, always running to the village. I think he was in trouble." Miss Marple nodded, filing Clara's words next to Lionel's ledger and Mr. Harrow's arguments. Clara was free of the smugglers, but Lionel needed her help. She found Lionel in the study, packing a bag, his face bruised and his eyes red. His blue scarf was gone, but a smudge of tar marked his sleeve. "Lionel," Miss Marple said, her tone light. "You're leaving? I hoped we could talk about Black Rock. You were in deep, weren't you?" Lionel's hands shook, and his voice broke. I had to, Miss Marple. I owed Tom money from gambling. He said steal or he'd hurt Beatrice. I took the necklace, the watch, anything I could. I'm sorry." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. "You made a mistake, dear, but you can make it right. Tell the constable everything. It'll help. You and Beatrice." Lionel nodded, tears in his eyes. "I will. I just want this over." Miss Marple patted his arm, her mind noting his confession. Lionel's debts had driven him to steal, but his heart wasn't in it. He'd heal with time. At lunch, the mood was lighter. Mr. Harrow ate quietly, his usual grumbling gone, his face pale after his brother's arrest. Clara smiled faintly, her sketchbook open to a harmless drawing of roses. Captain Reed was absent, locked up with the others, and Beatrice hummed as she served soup. Miss Marple noticed a returned locket on Mary's neck, and Beatrice whispered that all the stolen items were back, save Mr. Harrow's pen, still missing. "Almost done," Miss Marple said softly, squeezing Beatrice's hand. "Just a few threads left." After lunch, she visited Mr. Harrow in the garden where he was pacing, his face drawn. "Mr. Harrow," she said, her tone gentle, "your brother's caused quite a stir. Did you know about his work at Black Rock?" Harrow's eyes flashed and his voice was sharp. "Tom? No, I didn't. He's been a troublemaker since we were boys, but smuggling? I'd have turned him in myself. I'm leaving tomorrow, Miss Marple. This place is cursed." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes sharp. "Of course, sir. Though that pen of yours, silver, wasn't it? Curious it's still missing." Harrow's face flushed and he shrugged. "Cheap thing. Probably under a chair. Good day." He stomped off, his steps quick. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Harrow's anger felt real, but his pen's absence nagged her. She decided to check the study where it had vanished. The room was tidy, but she found a clue, a small silver cap, like a pen's, caught in the rug. She tucked it into her bag. Next to the key, ribbon, bead cloth, cigarette butt, hook, thread, glass, clip, rope, knife, matchbox, coin, and sketches. The pen was a loose thread, but a small one. In the village, she stopped at Mr. Carter's shop, where the air smelled of tar and fish. "Heard about the arrests," he said, mending a net. "Good work, miss. Black Rock's quiet now." Miss Marple nodded, picking up a brass hook. "And Jimmy and Eddie, how are they?" Carter sighed. "Scared, but talking. They were in over their heads following Tom Harrow, said he promised them cash for running crates." She thanked him and visited Mrs. Gibbs at the post office. "Miss Marple," she said, her nose twitching, "the whole village is talking about Black Rock, and I found that pen, Mr. Harrow's silver, in Jimmy's pocket when they brought him in." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Wonderful, Mrs. Gibbs, that's the last piece." Back at the manor, the afternoon passed quietly. Miss Marple saw Clara sketching flowers. Her face relaxed. She noticed Mary humming as she dusted, her locket gleaming. She heard Beatrice laugh for the first time in weeks, planning a new tea party, and she found a final clue, a dropped match in the hall, smelling of tar, likely reeds, tying him to the cove. At dinner, the manor felt alive again. Mr. Harrow ate in silence. Clara chatted about her art, and Beatrice served cake, her smile wide. Miss Marple raised her glass, her voice warm. "To St. Mary's Bay, dear. Safe at last." As night fell, Miss Marple sat by her window, knitting, the cliffs dark and quiet. No lights at Black Rock tonight. The smugglers were gone. The stolen. Goods returned, the mystery solved. She thought of St. Mary Mead, where a lost brooch had once unraveled a theft. Here the stakes were higher, but the human heart was the same. Greedy, scared, but always leaving clues. She set her knitting down and smiled. The puzzle was complete, every thread stitched tight. Tomorrow she'd rest, but tonight Miss Jane Marple savored the quiet of a job well done. Chapter 14. The Stranger's Letter. Miss Jane Marple sat in the cozy sitting room of Seaside Manor, her knitting needles clicking softly as the late morning sun streamed through the lace curtains. The room smelled of fresh scones and tea, a comforting change from the tension that had gripped St. Mary's Bay for weeks. The smuggling ring at Black Rock Cove was finished. Captain Reed, Lionel, Jimmy Pike, Eddie, and Tom Harrow were in custody, and Beatrice's stolen necklace, candlestick, and other missing items were safely returned. The manor felt alive again, with Beatrice humming as she planned a village tea party to celebrate. But Miss Marple's sharp eyes never rested, and this morning, a new puzzle had landed in her lap. A strange letter slipped under Beatrice's door with no signature and a cryptic message. A new mystery was brewing, and Miss Marple was ready to unravel it. Beatrice bustled in, carrying a tray with a teapot and cups, her face brighter than it had been in weeks. But her hands trembled slightly as she set the tray down, and she pulled a folded paper from her apron pocket. "Jane, I found this under the front door this morning," she said, her voice low. "It's odd. No name, just words that don't make sense. What do you think?" Miss Marple took the letter, her fingers careful as she unfolded it. The paper was rough, the handwriting sharp and hurried. "The shadow moves at dusk, watch the lighthouse, trust no one." Her lips pursed and her eyes sharpened behind her glasses. "Curious, dear," she said, her tone calm. "No signature, no address. When did you find it?" "Just after breakfast," Beatrice said, sitting across from her. "I thought it was a prank, but after all we've been through, I'm worried, Jane." Miss Marple patted her hand, her smile gentle. "Don't fret, dear. It's likely nothing, but we'll look into it. Shadows and lighthouses sounds like a riddle. Has anyone new been about the manor?" Beatrice shook her head. "Just the usual guests, Clara, Mr. Harrow, and a new gentleman, Mr. Ellis, who arrived yesterday. He's quiet, keeps to himself. Oh, and Mary's been jumpy, but that's probably from the smuggling business." Miss Marple nodded, filing away the names. Clara, Mr. Harrow, Mr. Ellis, Mary. The letter was a clue, and the lighthouse, a mile up the coast, was a place to start. She tucked the letter into her knitting bag, next to the few keepsakes she'd kept from the smuggling case, the green bead, blue wool thread, and tarnished key. After tea, Miss Marple decided to talk to Clara, who was sketching in the conservatory, her pencil moving lightly over a drawing of the manor's roses. Clara looked up, her dark eyes calmer than before, a faint smile on her face. "Good morning, Miss Marple," she said. "It's nice to draw flowers again." "Lovely, dear," Miss Marple said, settling nearby with her knitting. "You've got a sharp eye. Ever sketched the lighthouse up the coast? I hear it's quite a sight at dusk." Clara's pencil paused, and her smile faded slightly. "The lighthouse? No, I haven't been there. It's too far, and the path steep." "Why do you ask?" Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. "Oh, just a passing thought. Someone left a note about it mentioning shadows at dusk. You haven't seen anyone odd around, have you?" Clara's fingers tightened on her pencil. "No, miss, just the new guest, Mr. Ellis. He was walking near the cliffs yesterday looking at the sea. But he didn't say much." She stood, closing her sketchbook. "I should finish this later." Miss Marple watched her go, her mind sharp. Clara's unease, her quick exit, something about the lighthouse bothered her. She decided to keep an eye on the young artist whose sketches had once been signals for smugglers. Next, she sought out Mr. Harrow, who was in the garden, puffing a cigar and muttering about the weather. His face was still drawn from his brother, Tom's arrest, but his scowl was back. "Morning, Mr. Harrow," Miss Marple said, her tone light. "I was thinking of the lighthouse. Ever walk that way at dusk? I hear the view's striking." Harrow snorted, his cigar smoke curling. "Lighthouse? Waste of time. I stick to the manor, Miss Marple. Too many rocks out there." His eyes narrowed. "Why are you asking? More trouble?" Miss Marple smiled, her eyes gentle. "Just curious, sir. A note mentioned shadows there. You haven't seen anything strange, have you? With Mr. Ellis, perhaps?" Harrow's face reddened. "Ellis. Keeps to himself, always scribbling in a notebook. Shifty, if you ask me. But I've got no time for his nonsense." He stomped off, his cigar trailing smoke. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Harrow's temper, his distrust of Mr. Ellis. It was worth noting. She decided to meet the new guest herself. She found Mr. Ellis in the library, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, reading a book on coastal history. His face was pale, his hands fidgety as he looked up. "Good morning, Mr. Ellis," Miss Marple said, sitting across from him with her knitting. "You're new to St. Mary's Bay. What brings you here?" Ellis adjusted his glasses, his voice soft. "Just a holiday, miss. The sea's restful, and I like the history. Lighthouses, cliffs, that sort of thing." His eyes flicked to the window, toward the coast. Miss Marple's needles clicked. "The lighthouse is lovely, I hear." Ever visited at dusk? Someone mentioned shadows moving there. Ellis's hand twitched and his book slipped slightly. Dusk? No, I prefer mornings. Shadows are just tricks of the light, aren't they? He forced a smile, but his eyes were uneasy. Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing his reaction next to Clara's and Harrow's. Ellis was hiding something, perhaps tied to the letter. She thanked him and left, her knitting bag heavier with suspicion. By midday, Miss Marple took a walk to the village, hoping to catch Mrs. Gibbs or Mr. Carter. The air was salty, the gulls crying overhead. At the post office, Mrs. Gibbs was sorting letters, her sharp nose twitching. Miss Marple, she said, leaning forward. Heard about that letter at the manor. Strange, isn't it? Yes, Miss Marple said, her smile warm. Have you seen anything odd? New faces or talk of the lighthouse? Mrs. Gibbs's eyes gleamed. That Mr. Ellis was here yesterday, posting a letter with no name, just an address up the coast. And I saw him near the lighthouse last night looking shifty. If you ask me, he's up to something. Miss Marple nodded, her heart quickening. Thank you, Mrs. Gibbs. You're a treasure. She visited Mr. Carter's shop next, where the air smelled of fish and tar. Carter was mending a net, his face grim. Heard about that note, he said, and I saw lights at the lighthouse last night, flickering like signals. Not smugglers again, I hope. Miss Marple picked up a small brass hook, her eyes sharp. Let's hope not. What about Mr. Ellis? Seen him around? Carter nodded. Aye, near the lighthouse, carrying a bag. Quiet sort, but his eyes are always moving. Watch him, miss. Miss Marple thanked him and returned to the manor, her mind buzzing. Ellis at the lighthouse, a nameless letter, flickering lights. The new mystery was taking shape. She decided to check the manor's hall where Beatrice had found the note. There, caught on a floorboard, was a tiny scrap of paper torn and smudged with a single word, dusk. She tucked it into her bag, next to the letter in bead. At lunch, the mood was cautious. Mr. Harrow grumbled about the soup. Clara ate quietly, and Mr. Ellis picked at his food, his eyes on his plate. Beatrice whispered that Mary had found a strange mark on the kitchen door, a scratch like someone had tried to force it. Miss Marple squeezed her hand, promising to look into it. After lunch, Miss Marple took a walk to the lighthouse, a tall, weathered tower on a rocky outcrop. The path was steep, but she took it slowly, her eyes scanning for clues. Near the lighthouse door, she found a fresh scuff mark, deep and uneven, with a trace of mud. And there, caught on a thorn, was a thread, gray, like the coat Mr. Ellis wore. She tucked it into her bag, her heart quickening. The lighthouse was locked, but she peered through a window, seeing shadows inside, boxes perhaps, or crates. A faint smell of oil lingered, and she spotted a cigarette butt on the ground, fresh and unweathered. She added it to her bag, her mind racing. The lighthouse was active, and the letter's shadow was no ghost. Back at the manor, the afternoon passed with Miss Marple watching. She saw Clara sketching in the garden, her pencil steady but her eyes on the cliffs. She noticed Mary drop a cup, her voice high when Beatrice asked why. She heard Mr. Harrow arguing with Mr. Ellis in the library, something about keeping quiet. And she found a dropped pencil in the hall, sharpened to a fine point like one Mr. Ellis used. Dinner was tense, with Mr. Harrow snapping at Mary, Clara barely speaking, and Mr. Ellis eating quickly, his glasses fogging. Beatrice whispered about a strange noise last night, a creak near the lighthouse path. Miss Marple squeezed her hand, promising answers. As night fell, Miss Marple sat by her window, knitting, watching the lighthouse. A light flickered, faint and quick, answered by another from the sea. She watched until it vanished, her mind weaving the threads. Ellis's letter, the lighthouse lights, the gray thread, the cigarette butt, the scratch on the door. A new game was afoot, and she was ready to play. She set her knitting down and smiled. The puzzle was fresh. Secrets at the lighthouse, a stranger's warning, Ellis's nervous eyes. Tomorrow, she'd press Ellis, watch Clara, and alert Constable Evans. Miss Jane Marple was on the case, and no mystery stayed hidden long. Chapter 15. Shadows at the Lighthouse. Miss Jane Marple sat in the parlor of Seaside Manor, her knitting needles clicking softly as the morning mist clung to the windows. The room smelled of fresh tea and lavender polish, a calm contrast to the new puzzle stirring in St. Mary's Bay. The smuggling ring at Black Rock Cove was behind them, with Beatrice's stolen goods returned and the culprits jailed. But a fresh mystery had taken root. A cryptic letter about shadows at dusk, and the lighthouse slipped under Beatrice's door. Clues were mounting. The gray thread, cigarette butt, hidden key, torn map, and coded note found in the attic, all pointing to Mr. Ellis, the new guest, and strange activity at the lighthouse. Yesterday's walk to the lighthouse had confirmed it was no idle place with scuff marks, oil smells, and flickering lights at dusk. Today, Miss Marple resolved to dig deeper, starting with the lighthouse itself. The shadows were moving, and she was ready to catch them. Beatrice joined her for breakfast, setting out scones in a steaming teapot, her face less worried but still tense. She clutched a small notebook, her fingers fidgeting. "Jane, I found something else," she whispered, sliding the notebook across the table. It was in the hall, near where that letter appeared. Just a scrap, but it's odd. Miss Marple opened the notebook, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. A single page was torn with a scrawled line. Lighthouse, dusk, 3rd. The handwriting was sharp, like the letters, but shakier, as if written in haste. Her lips pursed. "Very curious, dear," she said, her tone calm. "The 3rd is tomorrow. Has anything else turned up, any missing items?" Beatrice shook her head, her curls bouncing. "Not since the smuggling stopped. But Mary's been so jumpy, and Mr. Ellis was asking about the lighthouse yesterday, saying he wanted to sketch it. I don't trust him, Jane." Miss Marple tucked the scrap into her knitting bag, next to the letter, gray thread, cigarette butt, key, and map. "We'll keep an eye on him, dear. Let's see what the lighthouse holds." After breakfast, Miss Marple decided to start with Clara, whose sketches had once been key to the smuggling ring. She found the young artist in the garden, sketching a gull perched on a fence, her pencil steady but her eyes darting to the cliffs. "Good morning, Clara," Miss Marple said, settling on a bench with her knitting. "Your drawings are lovely. Ever sketched the lighthouse lately? I hear it's busy at dusk." Clara's pencil paused and her face paled. "The lighthouse? No, miss, I don't go there. After the smuggling, I stick to flowers and birds." Her voice trembled, and she glanced at the manor. "Of course, dear," Miss Marple said, her smile gentle. "Though you mentioned seeing Mr. Harrow there. Any others? Mr. Ellis, perhaps?" Clara's fingers tightened on her sketchbook. "Mr. Ellis was there 2 nights ago, near the lighthouse. Path, he had a lantern like he was looking for something. I didn't stay long, I don't like him." She stood, clutching her sketchbook. "I need to finish this." Miss Marple watched her go, her mind sharp. Clara's fear of Ellis and the lighthouse was real, echoing the letter's warning to trust no one. She decided to talk to Mr. Ellis next, hoping to catch him off guard. She found him in the library, hunched over his notebook, his glasses glinting. His gray coat hung on a chair, a faint smell of oil clinging to it. "Good morning, Mr. Ellis," Miss Marple said, her voice warm. "You're fond of history, I see. The lighthouse must be fascinating. Have you been sketching it at dusk? I hear shadows move there." Ellis's pen froze and his face reddened slightly. "Dusk? No, I prefer daylight. The lighthouse is just an old building, miss. No shadows worth seeing." His eyes flicked to the window, and his fingers tapped nervously on his notebook. "Miss." Marple's needles clicked steadily. "Of course, though a note mentioned activity there tomorrow at dusk. You haven't know anything about that, would you?" Ellis forced a laugh, his voice thin. "Notes? Sounds like village nonsense. I'm just here for the quiet, nothing more." He stood, grabbing his notebook. "Excuse me, I have reading to do." Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing his nerves, next to the gray thread and the lighthouse key. Ellis was involved, perhaps the letter's author or its target. She decided to check the manor's hall again, where Beatrice had found the note and scrap. Near the front door, she found a fresh, Clue, a small folded paper half hidden under a rug. It read, "Keep watch, he's closer." The handwriting matched the scraps, sharp and shaky. She tucked it into her bag, her heart quickening. The mystery was growing, and someone was warning, or threatening. By mid-morning, Miss Marple took a walk to the lighthouse, the sea air sharp and the gulls crying overhead. The path was rocky, but she moved carefully, her eyes scanning for clues. Near the lighthouse door, she found a new scuff mark, deeper than yesterday's, with a trace of oil. And there, caught on a jagged stone, was a small brass button like one on Ellis's coat. She added it to her bag, next to the thread, cigarette butt, key, map, and notes. The lighthouse door was still locked, but the hidden key she'd found yesterday fit perfectly. She didn't enter, too risky alone, but peered inside, seeing crates stacked in the shadows, their wood rough and unmarked. A faint creak came from above, like footsteps on the spiral stairs, and she stepped back, her breath steady. Someone was using the lighthouse, and tomorrow's dusk meeting was key. Back at the manor, Miss Marple sought out Mr. Harrow, who was in the garden, his cigar smoldering as he muttered about leaving soon. "Morning, Mr. Harrow," she said, her tone light. "I was at the lighthouse today. Ever visited at dusk? A note mentioned shadows there." Harrow's cigar dropped ash and his scowl deepened. "Lighthouse? No time for that nonsense. Ellis is the one poking around there, not me." His voice was sharp and he stomped off, his boots kicking gravel. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Harrow's anger at Ellis was telling, but his quick dismissal felt forced. She decided to visit the village, seeking Mrs. Gibbs and Mr. Carter. At the post office, Mrs. Gibbs was sorting letters, her eyes gleaming. "Miss Marple," she said, leaning forward. "Heard about that lighthouse note. I saw Ellis there last night with a bag, looking sneaky." Miss Marple nodded, her smile warm. "And anyone else? Mary, perhaps? Or Mr. Harrow?" Mrs. Gibbs's nose twitched. "Mary was in the village late, buying thread, but she's been odd since the smuggling. Harrow keeps to the manor, grumbling. Watch Ellis, miss." Miss Marple thanked her and stopped at Mr. Carter's shop, where the air smelled of fish and tar. "Lighthouse trouble?" he said, mending a net. "Saw lights there last night, flickering like before. Ellis was nearby, carrying something heavy." Miss Marple picked up a small brass ring, her eyes sharp. "And Mary? Any sign of her there?" Carter shrugged. "Saw her near the cliffs, looking nervous. She's not herself, miss." Miss Marple returned to the manor, her mind buzzing. Ellis at the lighthouse, Mary's odd behavior, Harrow's temper, the notes about dusk. At lunch, the mood was tense. Mr. Harrow grumbled about the fish, Clara ate quietly, and Ellis picked at his food, his glasses fogging. Beatrice whispered that Mary had dropped a tray, muttering about shadows. Miss Marple squeezed her hand, promising answers. After lunch, Miss Marple checked the attic, where she'd found the coded note. There, in a dusty corner, was a fresh clue, a small locked diary, its clasp matching the lighthouse key. She didn't open it yet, tucking it into her bag, but her heart raced. The diary was a link, perhaps Ellis's or Mary's. In the afternoon, she saw Clara sketching, her eyes on the lighthouse. She noticed Mary polishing silver, her hands shaky, a gray thread on her apron. She heard Harrow arguing with Ellis in the hall, something about staying out of it. And she found a dropped match near the kitchen door, smelling of oil. Dinner was quiet, with Harrow snapping at Mary, Clara barely speaking, and Ellis eating quickly. Beatrice whispered about a strange noise, a thud near the lighthouse path. Miss Marple squeezed her hand, her mind weaving the threads. Ellis's button, Mary's thread, the diary, the lighthouse crates. As night fell, Miss Marple sat by her window, knitting, watching the lighthouse. A light flickered, answered by the sea. She watched until it vanished, her mind sharp. The shadows were gathering, and tomorrow's dusk would reveal them. She set her knitting down and smiled. The puzzle was clear. A secret at the lighthouse. Ellis's nervous moves, Mary's fear, Harrow's anger. Tomorrow she'd unlock the diary, press Ellis, and alert Constable Evans. Miss Jane Marple was closing in, and the truth was near. Chapter 16. The Diary's Clue Miss. Jane Marple sat in the quiet of her room at Seaside Manor, her knitting needles clicking softly as the morning light slipped through the curtains. The air carried the faint scent of sea salt and Beatrice's lavender soap, but her mind was fixed on the puzzle of St. Mary's Bay. The smuggling ring at Black Rock Cove was long behind them, with the manor's stolen goods returned and the culprits jailed, but a new mystery had taken hold. A cryptic letter warning of shadows at dusk at the lighthouse, followed by a string of clues: the gray thread, cigarette butt, hidden key, torn map, coded note, brass button, lighthouse crates, and the locked diary she'd found in the attic yesterday. The diary's clasp matched the lighthouse key, and Miss Marple was certain it held answers about Mr. Ellis, Mary's odd behavior, or the flickering lights at dusk. Today she would unlock the diary and follow its secrets, tugging the threads of this new riddle. The lighthouse was whispering, and she was ready to listen. She tucked her knitting into her bag. Its contents: gray thread, cigarette butt, key, map, notes, button, and now the diary, shifting softly, and headed to the parlor. For breakfast, Beatrice was already there, setting out toast, jam, and tea, her face less tense but her eyes still worried. She clutched a small cloth, her fingers fidgeting. "Jane, I found something in the kitchen this morning," she said, her voice low. "A button like the one you showed me near the back door. Do you think it's important?" Miss Marple took the button, brass and scratched, identical to the one near the lighthouse. Her lips pursed. "Very curious, dear," she said, slipping it into her bag. "Have there been any other odd things? Missing items or strange noises?" Beatrice shook her head, her curls trembling. "Not since that letter. But Mary's been so quiet, and Mr. Ellis was up late walking in the garden. I heard his door creak past midnight." Miss Marple patted her hand, her smile gentle. "We're getting close, dear. Buttons and creaks are clues, and I'm piecing them together. Let's keep watch." After breakfast, Miss Marple retreated to her room to examine the diary. The lighthouse. Key turned smoothly in the clasp, and the lock clicked open. Inside, the pages were filled with tight, neat handwriting. Not Ellis's sharp scrawl or Mary's loopy script, but someone else's. The entries were dated, starting a month ago, and described deliveries at the lighthouse, signals at dusk, and the man in gray. One line caught her eye. "He watches from the cliffs but doesn't know I see him. Dusk, 3rd, big move." Tomorrow was the 3rd. Her heart quickened. The diary belonged to someone spying on the lighthouse. Perhaps a victim, perhaps a player. She tucked the diary back into her bag, her mind racing. The man in gray could be Ellis with his gray coat, but the writer's identity was unclear. She decided to start with Mary, whose jumpy behavior and gray-threaded apron had nagged her. She found the maid in the kitchen, polishing silver, her hands shaky and her eyes darting to the door. "Good morning, Mary," Miss Marple said, her voice warm, settling at the table with her knitting. "You've been so busy, dear. I found a button by the back door, brass like one from a coat. Have you seen anyone odd about, perhaps near the lighthouse?" Mary's polished cloth slipped, and her face flushed. "Lighthouse? No, miss, I don't go there. Just the village for errands." Her voice was high, and she fumbled with a spoon. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. "Of course, dear, though I hear it's busy at dusk with lights and shadows. You mentioned seeing Mr. Ellis there. Anyone else?" Mary's eyes widened, and she shook her head. "Just him, miss, with a lantern. I was passing by, that's all. I should finish this." She hurried to the sink, her apron catching on a chair, revealing another gray thread. Miss Marple noted Mary's panic, the thread, and her lie about passing by. Mary was involved, perhaps unwillingly, like Clara had been with the smugglers. She decided to talk to Mr. Ellis next, hoping to catch him off balance. She found him in the library, scribbling in his notebook, his gray coat draped over a chair, missing a button. "Good morning, Mr. Ellis," Miss Marple said, her tone light. "You're always writing, I see. Ever note anything about the lighthouse? I found a diary mentioning signals at dusk tomorrow." Ellis's pen froze and his glasses slipped down his nose. A diary? I don't know anything about that, miss. The lighthouse is just a landmark, nothing more. His voice was tight and his fingers tapped his notebook. Miss Marple's smile was gentle. Of course. Though a button like yours was near the lighthouse and another by the manor's door. You haven't been there at dusk, have you? Ellis's face reddened and he stood, grabbing his coat. Buttons? I lose them all the time. Excuse me, I need some air. He hurried out, his notebook left open, revealing a sketch of the lighthouse with third circled. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Ellis's sketch, his missing button, his nerves. He was deep in this, perhaps the man in gray. She glanced at the notebook, noting a scrawled word. Signal. She decided to check the lighthouse again, but first she sought out Clara, hoping her sharp eyes had seen more. Clara was in the conservatory, sketching a vase of daisies, her face calm, but her pencil slow. Clara, dear, Miss Marple said, sitting nearby. You saw Mr. Ellis at the lighthouse with a lantern. Have you noticed anything else? Perhaps Mary, or lights at dusk? Clara's pencil paused, and her voice was soft. I saw Mary there once, miss, near the lighthouse, talking to a man, not Ellis, someone taller in a dark coat. It was quick and she looked scared. I didn't tell anyone. I'm done with trouble. Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing the tall man next to Mary's fear and the diary's man in gray. You've done right, dear. Thank you. By midday, Miss Marple walked to the lighthouse, the sea air sharp and the cliffs quiet. Near the door, she found a fresh clue, a dropped match, smelling of oil, like the lighthouse's crates. And there in the dirt was a faint footprint, small and narrow like Mary's shoes. She tucked the match into her bag, her heart quickening. The lighthouse was active, and tomorrow's dusk was the key. Back at the manor, she checked the attic again, hoping for more clues. In a dusty corner, she found a small folded paper, its edges worn. It read, Third Dusk Lighthouse. Don't trust E. The handwriting matched the diaries. E was likely Ellis, but the writer, Mary, or someone else, was watching him. She added the paper to her bag, her mind racing. At lunch, the mood was heavy. Mr. Harrow grumbled about the bread, Clara ate quietly, and Ellis picked at his food, his glasses fogging. Beatrice whispered that Mary had left early, saying she felt ill. Miss Marple squeezed her hand, her mind on Mary's footprint and the tall man. After lunch, Miss Marple visited Mr. Harrow in the garden, his cigar smoldering. Mr. Harrow, she said, her tone light. Ever see Mary or Ellis at the lighthouse? A note mentioned signals tomorrow at dusk. Harrow's cigar dropped ash, and his scowl deepened. Ellis is always sneaking around, but Mary? She's just a maid. Lighthouse nonsense doesn't concern me. He stomped off, his boots heavy. Miss Marple noted his dismissal, but his anger at Ellis felt forced. She visited the village next, seeking Mrs. Gibbs and Mr. Carter. At the post office, Mrs. Gibbs leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. Miss Marple, I saw Mary last night near the lighthouse with a tall man in a dark coat. Looked like trouble. Miss Marple nodded, her smile warm. And Ellis? Posted another letter, no name, just an address up the coast, Mrs. Gibbs said. He's hiding something, miss. At Mr. Carter's shop, the air was thick with tar. Lighthouse lights again, he said, mending a net. Saw Mary there looking scared with a man, not Ellis, and Ellis was nearby watching. Miss Marple picked up a brass hook, her eyes sharp. Thank you, Mr. Carter. Back at the manor, the afternoon passed with Miss Marple watching. She saw Clara sketching, her eyes on the lighthouse. She noticed Mary return, her face pale, a new gray scarf around her neck. She heard Harrow arguing with Ellis in the library, something about minding your own business. And she found a dropped cigarette near the back door matching the lighthouse's. Dinner was tense, with Harrow snapping at Clara, Ellis eating quickly, and Mary serving with shaky hands. Beatrice whispered about a strange noise, a thud near the lighthouse path. Miss Marple squeezed her hand, her mind weaving the threads. Diary's clue, Ellis's sketch, Mary's scarf, the tall man, the lighthouse crates. As night fell, Miss Marple sat by her window, knitting, watching the lighthouse. A light flickered, answered by the sea. She watched until it vanished, her mind sharp. The shadows were closing in, and tomorrow's dusk would reveal them. She set her knitting down and smiled. The puzzle was clear. Secrets at the lighthouse. Ellis's signals, Mary's fear, the tall man's shadow. Tomorrow she'd confront Mary, watch Ellis, and alert Constable Evans. Miss Jane Marple was on the trail, and the truth was near. Chapter 17. The Dusk Meeting. Miss Jane Marple sat in the parlor of Seaside Manor, her knitting needles clicking softly as the morning sun filtered through the lace curtains. The room smelled of fresh tea and warm scones, but her mind was sharp, tangled in the puzzle of St. Mary's Bay. The smuggling ring at Black Rock Cove was a memory, with Beatrice's stolen goods returned and the culprits jailed. But a new mystery gripped the village. A cryptic letter about shadows at dusk at the lighthouse, followed by a trail of clues: gray thread, cigarette butt, hidden key, torn map, coded note, locked diary, brass button, lighthouse crates, gray glove, and a coded letter found in Mr. Ellis's coat. Yesterday's discovery of the diary's entries detailing deliveries and a man in gray with a big move at dusk on the 3rd had set her heart racing. Today was the 3rd, and Miss Marple planned to watch the lighthouse at dusk, ready to catch the shadows in action. The meeting was the key, and she was determined to unravel it. Beatrice joined her for breakfast, setting out toast, jam, and a teapot, her hands steadier but her eyes still worried. She slid a small envelope across the table, her voice low. "Jane, this was under my door this morning," she said. "Another note like the last one. It's unsettling." Miss Marple opened the envelope, her fingers careful. The paper was rough, the handwriting sharp and hurried like the diaries. "Dusk tonight, lighthouse, beware the gray." Her lips pursed and her eyes sharpened. "Very curious, dear," she said, tucking the note into her knitting bag. Next to the diary, thread, cigarette butt, key, map, notes, button, and glove. "Have you seen anything odd? Mr. Ellis, Mary, or perhaps Mr. Harrow?" Beatrice shook her head, her curls trembling. Mr. Ellis was up early, heading to the cliffs. Mary's been quiet, avoiding everyone. Mr. Harrow's packing to leave tomorrow, grumbling as always. "Oh, Jane, what's happening?" Miss Marple patted her hand, her smile gentle. "We're close, dear. Notes and shadows are clues, and I'm stitching them together. I'll need to speak to Constable Evans today." After breakfast, Miss Marple sought out Mary, hoping to press her about the lighthouse and the tall man Clara had seen. She found the maid in the kitchen, scrubbing pots, her face pale and her hands shaky. A gray scarf was tied loosely around her neck, its threads matching the one from the lighthouse. "Good morning, Mary," Miss Marple said, her voice warm, settling at the table with her knitting. "You've been so quiet, dear. I know you've been to the lighthouse meeting someone. A note tonight mentions dusk. Can you tell me anything?" Mary's pot clattered into the sink, and her eyes widened with fear. "Lighthouse? I didn't mean to, miss. He said I had to meet him or he'd tell everyone about something bad. I don't know what's happening tonight." Her voice broke, and she clutched her scarf. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "Who's he, dear? The tall man Clara saw? You're safe now, tell me." Mary's lips trembled. "A man named Stokes, miss. Tall, dark hair, rough voice. He's not from here. I met him at the lighthouse once, and he gave me this scarf. Said to keep quiet. I saw Mr. Ellis there too, watching. I'm scared, miss." Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing Stokes next to the diary's man in gray and Ellis's nervous sketch. "You've done right, dear. Stay in the manor tonight and I'll sort it out." Next, she sought out Mr. Ellis, finding him in the garden, his notebook open, his gray coat slung over a bench. His glasses glinted as he looked up, his face tense. "Good morning, Mr. Ellis," Miss Marple said, her tone light. "I hear the lighthouse is busy tonight at dusk. A diary mentions a meeting and your name's come up. Care to share?" Ellis's notebook snapped shut, and his voice was sharp. "A diary? That's absurd, miss. I'm just a writer, here for the scenery. The lighthouse is nothing to me. His hands shook and a cigarette butt fell from his pocket, matching the one at the lighthouse. Miss Marple's smile was gentle. Of course, dear. Though a button from your coat and a note about the gray do make one wonder. You'll be at the manor tonight, I trust. Ellis nodded, his eyes darting to the cliffs. Yes, I'm staying in. Excuse me. He hurried off, leaving his coat behind. Miss Marple glanced at the coat, noting a torn seam where another button was missing. She tucked the cigarette butt into her bag, her mind on Ellis's sketch of the lighthouse with third circled. He was involved perhaps as a spy or a planner, but Stokes was a new piece. She visited Clara in the conservatory, where the young artist was sketching a seashell, her face calm but her eyes wary. Clara, dear, Miss Marple said, sitting nearby. You saw Mary with a tall man at the lighthouse. Have you seen him again, or perhaps Mr. Ellis acting odd? Clara's pencil paused and her voice was soft. I saw that man. Stokes, I heard Mary call him last night near the lighthouse with a bag. Mr. Ellis was watching from the cliffs, hiding. I don't trust either of them, miss. Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing Stokes's bag and Ellis's spying. Thank you, dear. You've a sharp eye. By midday, Miss Marple walked to the village to meet Constable Evans, her knitting bag heavy with clues. She found him at the police station, polishing his badge, his face serious. Miss Marple, he said, standing. Another mystery? Your note said the lighthouse tonight. Yes, Constable, she said, her voice calm. A meeting at dusk, likely trouble. Deliveries, signals, a man named Stokes and Mr. Ellis. Can you have men ready near the lighthouse? Evans nodded, his jaw set. I'll have 2 lads there by 5. We'll hide and watch. You stay safe, miss. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes sharp. I'll be careful, Constable. Shadows always leave traces. Back at the manor, she checked the lighthouse key and diary again, finding a new entry. Stokes plans to move the goods tonight. He watches, but he's no threat. Her heart quickened. Stokes was the leader, Ellis a watcher, perhaps a rival, or a traitor. She tucked the diary away, ready for dusk. At lunch, the mood was tense. Mr. Harrow grumbled about the soup. Clara ate quietly, and Ellis picked at his food, his glasses fogging. Mary served with shaky hands, her gray scarf slipping. Beatrice whispered that she'd found a strange mark on the back door. A smudge, like oil. Miss Marple squeezed her hand, her mind on the lighthouse crates. After lunch, Miss Marple took a walk to the lighthouse, staying on the safe path. Near the door, she found a fresh clue, a dropped coin, foreign and heavy, like the one from the smuggling days. And there, in the dirt, was a small torn cloth, gray and oily. She tucked both into her bag, her mind racing. The lighthouse was active and Stokes was moving tonight. Back at the manor, she saw Mr. Harrow in the garden, his cigar smoldering. Mr. Harrow, she said, her tone light. Ever hear of a man named Stokes? A note mentions him at the lighthouse. Tonight. Harrow's cigar dropped ash and his scowl deepened. Stokes? Never heard of him. Ellis is the one sneaking around, not me. He stomped off, his voice sharp. Miss Marple noted his anger, but his quick denial felt forced. She visited the village again, stopping at Mrs. Gibbs's post office. Miss Marple, she said, her nose twitching. Saw Stokes last night, tall man, dark coat, at the lighthouse with a crate. Mary was nearby, looking scared. Miss Marple nodded, her smile warm. And Ellis? Watching from the cliffs with a lantern, Mrs. Gibbs said. He's trouble, miss. At Mr. Carter's shop, the air smelled of tar. Lighthouse lights again, he said, mending a net. Stokes was there with a boat. Ellis was spying, and Mary ran off when she saw me. Miss Marple thanked him, her mind weaving the threads, Stokes's crate, Ellis's lantern, Mary's fear, the diary's warning. She returned to the manor, preparing for dusk. At 5, she met Constable Evans near the lighthouse path, their lanterns dim. We'll hide by the rocks, he whispered. You stay back, miss. Miss Marple nodded, settling behind a boulder, near the path, her shawl blending with the shadows. At dusk, figures appeared. Stokes, tall and dark, carrying a crate. Mary, her scarf loose, looking terrified. And Ellis, lurking near the cliffs, his notebook out. A boat nudged the shore, its hull low, and Stokes began loading the crate. Miss Marple signaled Evans with a soft tap, and his men crept forward. "Stop!" Evans shouted, his lantern flaring. Stokes dropped the crate, Mary screamed, and Ellis bolted, but the constable's men caught them, cuffs snapping shut. The crate spilled open, papers, coins, and a small, locked box, like the one in the diary. Miss Marple stayed back, her eyes sharp, watching the chaos. The trap had worked and the shadows were caught.